My mother laughed, taking a slow sip of her expensive Chardonnay. You will never have a house like your sister Clara. My dad nodded, tossing a pitying glance out the window toward my 5-year-old sedan parked in their driveway. My sister Brittany twirled her new diamond ring and smirked. You are just jealous, are not you? It makes sense. Not everyone has what it takes to live in a place like Crestview. I did not scream or throw a fit. I simply smiled, finished my coffee, and invited her over for tea the next day. She had no idea that when she arrived, she would be calling our mother in absolute hysterics, screaming that she had made a terrible mistake. My name is Clara, and I am 34 years old. My family has always treated me like the punchline to a joke I was never invited to be part of. If you have ever had your own flesh and blood steal your future just to fund someone else's ego, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you believe karma always collects its debts. It was a rainy Tuesday evening when I drove up to my parents' sprawling colonial home in a wealthy Connecticut suburb. I was actually in a fantastic mood. After months of grueling negotiations, my urban development firm had just secured a 200-acre land acquisition. It was a career-defining milestone, and despite 34 years of evidence proving otherwise, a foolish part of me still wanted to make my parents proud. I wanted to walk into that pristine marble-countered kitchen and show them that their eldest daughter was building an empire. When I walked in, the atmosphere was already thick with an unnatural celebratory energy. My parents, Patricia and Richard, were sitting at the kitchen island. My younger sister Brittany, who was 31 and had never held a job for more than 6 months, was leaning against the counter. Beside her stood her husband Jamal. Jamal is a 33-year-old African-American finance director who never missed an opportunity to remind everyone in the room exactly how much money he managed. He wore bespoke suits to family barbecues and treated me like the hired help. I set my bag down, pulling the acquisition folder from my briefcase. Mom, Dad, I have some huge news. I just closed on a property that is going to change everything. My mother held up a manicured hand, effectively silencing me. Not right now, Clara. We actually have our own news. Real news. Family news. My father cleared his throat, adjusting his gold watch. As you know, Jamal recently received a massive promotion. He is moving up in the financial world, dealing with high-net-worth clients. He and Brittany need a home that reflects their new social standing, an estate where they can entertain properly. Brittany beamed, leaning into Jamal. We are buying a house in the Crestview estate. It is the most exclusive eco-luxury community in Westchester County. Only the absolute elite even get approved to look at the lots. I felt a genuine twinge of surprise. I knew Crestview very well. Too well, actually. But before I could comment on the sheer impossibility of Jamal passing that specific homeowner association's financial background check, my mother delivered the blow that would shatter our family forever. The down payment was quite hefty, my mother said, her tone entirely too casual. But your father and I decided that family supports family. We emptied the joint family trust yesterday to cover the initial $300,000 to secure their lot. The air in the kitchen vanished. I stared at her, my mind scrambling to process the words. The joint family trust. That was not just my parents' money. That account held the funds my late grandmother had specifically set aside for my future, combined with money I had personally contributed during my early 20s, when my parents convinced me a shared high-yield account would benefit us all. Legally, they had administrative access, but morally, half of that money was undeniably mine. You emptied the trust, I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. You took grandmother's money and my contributions to buy Brittany a house. My father frowned, clearly annoyed by my lack of enthusiasm. Oh, do not start with the dramatics, Clara. We are reallocating family resources where they are most useful. Jamal is an executive. He is building real wealth. Brittany is going to be hosting corporate events that could make or break his career. They need a proper estate. And what about my future, I asked, gripping the edge of the marble island. What about the money I put into that account? My mother rolled her eyes, picking up her wine glass. Be realistic, Clara. You play with dirt and trees all day. You design parks and plant shrubs. What does a landscaper need with a $300,000 trust fund? You live a modest life. You drive that old car. You do not have the kind of social obligations your sister has. Jamal chuckled a deep, resonant sound full of condescension. Look, Clara, in the corporate finance world, optics are everything. You have to spend money to make money. It is an investment in the family brand. When my bonuses hit next year, maybe I will throw a few thousand your way to upgrade your gardening equipment. Brittany giggled, leaning her head on Jamal's shoulder. Come on, Clara. Be a good big sister for once. I am finally getting my dream home. You should be happy for me instead of throwing a tantrum over money you were never going to spend anyway. I looked at the four of them, my mother looking at me with thinly veiled disdain, my father completely dismissive of my existence, my sister draped in entitlement, and her husband a man who thought his finance degree made him a god among peasants. They had literally stolen my inheritance, my grandmother's final gift to me, to fund a fake lifestyle built on arrogance and ego. They expected me to scream. They expected me to cry, to throw the folder I was holding, to give them a reason to call me crazy and unstable. That was always their game. They would push me to the breaking point, and when I finally snapped, they would play the victims. But I was not that girl anymore. I looked down at the folder in my hands. The folder containing the deed to the 200-acre land acquisition I had just finalized. The land that happened to be the exact territory where the Crestview estate was currently expanding. I slowly slid the folder back into my briefcase and snapped the lock shut. The click echoed loudly in the sudden silence of the kitchen. I understand completely, I said, my voice perfectly level. You made an investment in the family brand. I hope it pays off exactly the way you expect it to. My mother scoffed. See? Was that so hard? You always make things so difficult, Clara. I did not argue. I did not demand my money back. I simply picked up my briefcase, turned my back on the people who were supposed to be my family, and walked toward the front door. Behind me, I could hear Jamal making a joke about my outfit, followed by the chorus of their laughter. It was a harsh, cruel sound that chased me out into the cold rain. The rain beat against my windshield as I pulled out of their pristine driveway. I gripped the steering wheel, letting the profound sense of betrayal wash over me for exactly 1 minute before my professional instincts took over. My parents had spent my entire life underestimating me, reducing my career as a high-end urban planner and real estate developer to playing with dirt. They had assumed I was weak and defenseless, an easy target for their financial theft. They were wrong. As I drove back toward the city, I picked up my phone and pressed the speed dial for my lead attorney. The game had just changed, and I was holding every single winning card. David answered on the second ring. I gave him a single instruction regarding the financial background check submitted to my development firm by one Jamal Davis. After that, I simply waited. I knew my family could not resist an opportunity to gloat. 4 days later, my mother summoned us for a mandatory family dinner at an upscale steakhouse in downtown Manhattan to formally celebrate Brittany and Jamal securing their new property. I arrived exactly on time, pulling my reliable sedan into the parking garage rather than using the valet. I took my seat at the reserved table, nursing a glass of sparkling water. My parents were already there, practically vibrating with anticipation. 20 minutes late, the golden couple finally made their grand entrance. Jamal strutted into the restaurant wearing a custom-tailored suit that practically screamed new money. Brittany clung to his arm, flashing her diamond ring at the hostess. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I watched the valet park the brand-new leased Porsche they had arrived in. A vehicle they clearly could not afford, but had acquired solely for the optics of their fabricated success. "Sorry we are late," Jamal announced loudly, pulling out a chair for Brittany. "The traffic coming down from Westchester County is brutal, but you have to expect that when you are commuting from a place like the Crestview estate." My mother clasped her hands together, beaming. "Oh, it is perfectly fine, darling. We are just so incredibly proud of you both. Tell us everything about the new house." For the next hour, the dinner conversation was entirely dominated by Jamal and his insufferable ego. He ordered a $500 bottle of Cabernet and proceeded to lecture the table about the exclusivity of their new neighborhood. "The Crestview estate is not just a housing development," he declared, swirling the dark wine in his glass. It is an ultra-luxury eco-community. They do not just let anyone buy property there. You cannot just have money. You need prestige. You need a flawless financial portfolio. My father leaned forward, hanging on every word. I imagine their background checks are quite rigorous. Rigorous is an understatement. Jamal chuckled, leaning back in his leather chair. The Homeowner Association Board is ruthless. They demand 2 years of audited financial statements, proof of liquid assets, and a comprehensive background check. As a finance director, I appreciate that level of security. It keeps the riffraff out. It guarantees that our neighbors are on our exact same social and economic level. I took a slow sip of my wine, hiding my amusement behind the rim of my glass. I knew exactly how rigorous the background checks at Crestview were, because I was the one who wrote the protocols. I also knew, thanks to my attorney David, that Jamal had completely fabricated his income statements. He had used his corporate finance background to doctor tax returns and bank statements, presenting a mirage of wealth to bypass my strict approval process. Any other developer would have flagged the fraud and denied the sale. I had personally ordered my legal team to push his application through. I wanted them inside my gates. Brittany reached across the table to pat my hand with fake sympathy. You should come visit us sometime, Clara. It might give you some inspiration for your landscaping jobs. The gardens at Crestview are absolutely breathtaking, though the security gates are strictly monitored, so you will have to park that embarrassing old clunker of yours outside and let us drive you in. We cannot have the neighbors seeing that thing in our driveway. Jamal laughed, a booming sound that drew irritated glances from nearby tables. Let her bring the car, Brittany. Maybe the security guards will think she is the hired help coming to trim the hedges. Seriously, Clara, when are you going to upgrade your life? You are 34 years old. You are still driving a car from 10 years ago and planting bushes for a living. You could not even afford the application fee for a community like Crestview. I cut a piece of my steak, chewing it methodically. I am perfectly content with my modest lifestyle, Jamal. I find that when you do not spend all your energy trying to look rich, you actually have the time to build real equity. My mother glared at me, her eyes flashing with anger. Do not be bitter, Clara. Your sister and brother-in-law have worked very hard to establish their brand. They belong in a place like Crestview. Jamal is an executive. He understands high-level investments. Exactly. Jamal agreed, puffing out his chest. You see, Clara, in real estate, the real power lies with the developers. The guy who owns Crestview is a legend in the corporate world. Nobody knows his real name. He operates through a web of shell companies and corporate trusts. They say he is a ruthless billionaire who controls every single aspect of the estate from the shadows. He built an empire out of nothing. That is the kind of wealth I respect. I wiped my mouth with a linen napkin, fighting the urge to smile. The legendary ruthless billionaire he idolized was sitting right across from him, wearing a sensible blouse and drinking a $14 glass of house wine. It is certainly an impressive development, I said, keeping my tone conversational. But I hear the environmental zoning laws there are incredibly restrictive. The entire property is designated as a protected woodland conservation area. Brittany waved her hand dismissively. Oh, they have all these silly rules about preserving the natural habitat. The HOA guidelines say you cannot even alter the exterior landscaping without a massive review process. But Jamal has connections. We are going to completely remodel the backyard. I raised an eyebrow, setting my fork down. I would be careful with that if I were you. The Crestview developer specifically retained the mineral and timber rights to the land. The old-growth oak trees in those backyards are protected by state environmental laws. The HOA has a strict zero-tolerance policy for unauthorized construction. If you breach the conservation agreement, they do not just fine you. They have the legal right to foreclose on the property and evict you entirely. The table went dead silent for a moment. My parents stared at me, clearly surprised by my specific knowledge. Jamal scoffed, breaking the tension with a condescending sneer. Listen to you quoting landscaping laws like a textbook. This is why you will always be a grunt worker, Clara. You think the rules apply to everyone. In the world of high finance and luxury real estate, rules are just suggestions for people who do not have enough money to bypass them. I am a finance director. I know how to handle a homeowner association. Money talks and I have plenty of it. I looked directly into his eyes, letting a cold, deadpan expression settle over my features. Money only talks when it actually belongs to you, Jamal. And developers rarely negotiate with people who break their foundational rules. My father slammed his hand on the table, rattling the silverware. That is enough, Clara. You have been jealous and cynical all evening. We came here to celebrate your sister's success, not listen to you lecture a financial executive about property laws you do not even understand. If you cannot be supportive, you can leave. I picked up my purse, sliding my chair back from the table. You are absolutely right, Dad. I should leave you all to celebrate your magnificent investment. I stood up, dropping $100 bill on the table to cover my portion of the meal. Enjoy your new home, Brittany. I am sure it will be a learning experience for everyone. I walked out of the steakhouse, leaving them to their delusions of grandeur. They thought they had put me in my place. They thought they had secured their position among the elite. But as I stepped into the cool night air, I pulled out my phone and sent a quick message to the Crestview security dispatch. Alert the gate guards. Jamal and Brittany Davis are moving into Lot 42 this weekend. Monitor all contractor vehicles entering their property. Document everything. The trap was officially armed. Jamal thought his fake money and arrogant attitude would protect him from the rules. He was about to find out exactly how ruthless the mysterious developer of Crestview Estate could truly be. And the best part was that he and my toxic parents were going to fund their own spectacular destruction. I did not even make it to my car before my mother's shrill voice echoed across the concrete walls of the underground parking garage. Clara, get your shoes back in here right now. We are not finished with you. I paused with my hand firmly on the door handle of my sedan. I had forgotten the cardinal rule of my toxic family. They never let you leave a room until they have extracted exactly what they want from you. I took a deep, steadying breath, locked my car doors, and obediently followed my mother back into the upscale steakhouse. When I returned to the table, the expensive bottle of Cabernet was completely empty, and Jamal was leaning back in his chair with a smug expression of total, unearned authority. Brittany was frantically rustling through her oversized designer handbag. "Sit down," my father commanded, pointing an angry finger at my empty chair. "Your sister has something important to show you. We did not invite you here tonight just to hear your pessimistic opinions on real estate law. We have a proposition for you." I sat down slowly, folding my hands neatly in my lap. Brittany finally pulled a crumpled, messy piece of paper from her bag and pushed it aggressively across the white linen tablecloth. I looked down at it. It was a crude, hand-drawn blueprint of a backyard space. There were sloppy squares and circles labeled with absolutely ridiculous demands. A massive infinity pool, a cascading stone waterfall, an outdoor kitchen wrapped entirely in imported Italian marble, and rows of exotic non-native palm trees that would never survive a brutal New York winter. "Since you are an urban planner and landscaper," Brittany said, waving her hand dismissively in my direction, "we decided to let you handle our backyard renovation. Consider it your housewarming gift to us. It is the absolute least you can do since Mom and Dad had to help us with the down payment on the house." I stared at the chaotic drawing, my professional brain short-circuiting at the sheer audacity. "You want me to design and execute a luxury landscaping project as a gift? Do you have any idea how much a project of this magnitude would actually cost? Materials alone for an infinity pool and imported stone decking would run upwards of $100,000. Not to mention the labor costs, the engineering permits, and the heavy machinery required for that kind of excavation." Jamal scoffed loudly, leaning forward and resting his elbows heavily on the table. "Do not exaggerate to make yourself sound important, Clara. It is just digging a hole in the ground and planting some bushes. You can easily get your little crew to do it over a couple of weekends. Besides, we are doing you a massive favor here. This will be incredible exposure for your little gardening business. When I host my executive finance dinners, I will make sure to tell all my high net worth buddies that my sister-in-law planted my shrubs. You might actually get some real paying clients out of this instead of just mowing lawns for middle-class suburbs." I looked from Jamal's arrogant face to the chaotic drawing on the table. Even if I were willing to work for free, which I am absolutely not, This design is physically and legally impossible at the Crestview estate. I tapped my index finger on a large circle Brittany had drawn right near the edge of the property line. You have the infinity pool going right through the ancient oak grove. Those trees are federally protected conservation property. You cannot touch them under any circumstances. The homeowner association will levy catastrophic fines the second a bulldozer crosses that property line. My mother slammed her hand against the table, causing the crystal water glasses to shake violently. Stop making excuses, Clara. You are always so terribly negative. You are always trying to ruin your sister's happiness with your rules. We offer you a generous chance to be part of this family, a chance to contribute something meaningful to Brittany's new life, and you immediately start complaining about trees and regulations. I am not making excuses, Mom. I am telling you the harsh reality of environmental law. I will not compromise my professional integrity or my business license to build an illegal swimming pool, and I certainly will not do it for free. I run a legitimate firm. I do not do unpaid manual labor just because Brittany feels entitled to a luxury backyard she cannot actually afford. The eruption was instantaneous and deafening. My father's face turned a dangerous mottled shade of red. How dare you speak to your sister that way? You are a bitter, jealous spinster who cannot stand to see her younger sister thriving. Brittany is building a magnificent life with a highly successful husband. She is going to have beautiful children and host elite society events. And what exactly are you doing? You are 34 years old, aging alone in a cramped apartment, obsessed with dirt and regulations because you have absolutely nothing else in your pathetic life. Brittany started forcing fake tears, burying her face dramatically in Jamal's expensive suit jacket. She ruins everything, Jamal. I just wanted my big sister to be part of our new home. I just wanted her to feel included, and she is calling us criminals for simply wanting a swimming pool. Jamal wrapped a fiercely protective arm around her, glaring at me with absolute disgust. You are sick, Clara. You are a sad, lonely woman who wants everyone else to be as miserable as you are. We do not need your cheap landscaping anyway. I will hire a real luxury contractor tomorrow. Someone who actually knows what they are doing and is not afraid to bend a few ridiculous tree-hugging rules. My mother stood up abruptly, tossing her linen napkin onto her empty dinner plate. I am thoroughly disgusted with you, Clara. You have no ambition, no loyalty, and no sense of family obligation. Do not bother coming to the housewarming party. In fact, do not bother calling us until you are ready to apologize and act like a proper supportive sister. Get out of our sight right now. I did not argue or attempt to defend myself. I simply turned on my heel and walked out of the restaurant, leaving them stewing in their own toxic outrage. As the heavy glass doors closed behind me, blocking out the sound of my mother complaining to a passing waiter, I felt a profound sense of peace. They had played right into my hands. I retrieved my car from the parking garage and merged onto the highway, heading north toward Westchester County. The rain had stopped, leaving the night air crisp and clear. My family genuinely believed I lived in a cramped apartment and struggled to make ends meet. They believed my 10-year-old sedan was a symbol of my financial failure. In reality, I drove an unassuming car because true wealth does not need to scream for attention. True wealth operates in the shadows. Over the past decade, while Brittany was bouncing between retail jobs and Jamal was leasing luxury cars, he could not afford to impress men who did not care about him. I was quietly buying up undeveloped land. I had leveraged my early landscaping business into urban planning contracts and eventually into full-scale real estate development. I took the profits from every successful commercial project and poured them into a single massive vision. 45 minutes later, I pulled off the main highway and turned onto a private winding road framed by ancient pine trees. At the end of the road stood the towering wrought iron gates of the Crestview estate. A highly sophisticated security system monitored the perimeter, complete with license plate readers and armed guards. Normally, any vehicle approaching the entrance would be stopped, subjected to a rigorous identification check, and forced to wait for resident approval. But as my older model sedan approached the checkpoint, the heavy iron gates immediately swung open. The head of security stepped out of the guardhouse, stood at attention, and offered a respectful wave as I drove through without slowing down. They did not need to check my identification because they all worked for me. I drove past the sprawling luxury properties that lined the lower elevation of the estate. I cruised right past Lot 42, the exact piece of land my parents had stolen my inheritance to secure for Brittany and Jamal. I continued driving up the private winding road that led to the highest peak of the conservation property. The road ended at a secluded, heavily fortified perimeter, securing a massive $15 million custom-built manor. The Central Estate. My home. I parked in the expansive underground garage, which housed my actual vehicle collection, and took the private elevator up to the main living area. The house was a masterpiece of modern, sustainable architecture, blending seamlessly into the natural rock formations of the mountain. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls offered a panoramic view of the entire valley, including the glowing lights of the development below. I was not a lowly landscaper desperate for a free backyard project. I was the sole owner, founder, and CEO of Crestview Developments. I was the mysterious, ruthless billionaire developer that Jamal had been praising all evening. I poured myself a glass of water and walked into my home office. The room was dominated by a massive drafting table covered in topological maps and zoning permits for the estate. My laptop sat in the center of a sleek mahogany desk. Just as I sat down, the phone rang. It was David, my lead corporate attorney, and the head of the Crestview legal department. "Good evening, Clara," David said, his voice tight with professional urgency. "I know it is late, but my team just finished the deep dive financial audit on Lot 42. The buyers, Jamal and Brittany Davis. You told me to personally review their homeowner association application before final approval. What did you find, David?" I asked, leaning back in my chair and gazing out the window at the dark forest below. "It is completely fabricated," David replied, a distinct edge of disbelief in his tone. Jamal Davis submitted doctored tax returns and highly manipulated bank statements to bypass our liquidity requirements. He used his background in corporate finance to create a web of phantom assets. He shifted debt into temporary shell companies just long enough to generate clean credit reports. The man is drowning in liabilities. The only real cash they presented was the $300,000 down payment, which was wired directly from an account belonging to your parents. I closed my eyes, absorbing the brutal reality of the numbers. My parents had drained the trust fund to give Jamal the illusion of wealth, and Jamal had used that stolen money to commit mortgage and homeowner association fraud. "He meets absolutely none of our wealth requirements," David continued. "If we run a standard secondary audit, the bank will flag the irregularities immediately. This is federal wire fraud and document forgery, Clara. The application is completely invalid. We need to reject the sale immediately and forward this file to the authorities. We cannot let a liability like this move into Crestview." I listened to the steady hum of the ventilation system in my office, weighing my options. Shutting them down now would mean Jamal gets rejected, and my parents lose the down payment to administrative penalties. It would be a sharp sting, but it would not be a fatal blow. Jamal would just spin a lie about how the developer was unreasonable, and my parents would coddle Brittany while finding another way to blame me. I needed a much more permanent solution. I needed them to build their own trap. "Approve the application." "David," I said, my voice perfectly calm. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Clara, you cannot be serious. The man committed financial fraud to buy property from your company. If he defaults on the remaining payments, it creates an administrative nightmare for the entire community." "He is not going to default, David. He is going to do something much worse." I picked up a red pen and drew a circle around Lot 42 on my master blueprint. "Push the paperwork through tonight. Grant them immediate access to the property. Waive the secondary financial audit and hand over the keys by Friday." David sighed heavily, clearly uncomfortable with the directive. "You are the boss, Clara. But I have to ask, why are we letting a fraudster inside the gates?" "Because I want him to feel comfortable," I replied. "I want Jamal to feel so powerful and untouchable that he decides the environmental conservation rules do not apply to him. I want him to hire unauthorized contractors. I want him to start digging that illegal infinity pool he was bragging about tonight. Let them move in, David. Let them break ground. Understood, David said, his tone shifting as he realized this was a calculated strategic maneuver. I will expedite the closing documents. The property is theirs. I hung up the phone and looked out over the sprawling estate. The trap was officially set. Jamal and Brittany were about to sign a legally binding contract with a homeowner association that I controlled entirely. They were about to risk everything they had on a piece of land with environmental restrictions so severe that a single unauthorized shovel strike would trigger catastrophic financial ruin. They thought they had secured their place in high society by stepping on me. They had no idea they had just walked willingly into the jaws of a predator they could not even see. Exactly 1 month later, the engraved invitation for the grand housewarming party arrived in my mailbox. I almost threw it in the trash, but the opportunity for frontline reconnaissance was simply too good to pass up. I pulled up to Lot 42 on a warm Saturday evening. The winding driveway was packed to the brim with leased luxury vehicles and high-end catering vans. The house itself was undeniably beautiful. It was a stunning architectural marvel of glass and reclaimed wood, perfectly nestled into the hillside. However, my attention was immediately drawn to the expansive backyard. The ancient oak grove stood tall and defiant, casting long shadows over the manicured lawn. These were the exact trees protected by my strict environmental conservation covenants. I found Jamal standing on the patio holding a heavy crystal glass of expensive bourbon. He did not look like a victorious man celebrating his new kingdom. He looked panicked and deeply agitated. He was surrounded by a group of his corporate finance buddies sweating through his designer silk shirt while glaring venomously at the massive trees. The homeowner association here is a complete nightmare, Jamal complained loudly, just as I stepped within earshot. I submitted my backyard renovation plans 3 different times, and they rejected them instantly. They said these stupid trees are protected by a strict conservation covenant. I am trying to build a luxury outdoor kitchen and a massive infinity pool, but they are treating this useless dirt like it is sacred ground. I grabbed a sparkling water from a passing waiter and leaned against a stone pillar, watching him unravel. His friends nodded sympathetically, offering terrible advice about bribing the local city inspectors. Jamal scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. He said he did not need to bribe anyone because he was simply going to find a contractor who did not care about the developer's ridiculous rules. He claimed he would just pay the fines later, after the pool was already in the ground, assuming the penalties would be a minor financial inconvenience. I took a slow sip of my water, suppressing a massive laugh. He truly believed his corporate title made him invincible against property law. The catering staff began circulating with expensive appetizers, signaling the start of the formal speeches. My mother, Patricia, clinked her champagne glass with a silver fork, demanding everyone's immediate attention. The crowd of 50 guests gathered around the massive outdoor fire pit. Patricia beamed, looking at Brittany, who was draped in a ridiculously expensive designer dress. "We are just so incredibly proud of Brittany and Jamal," my mother announced, her voice carrying over the crackling fire. "They have worked so hard to build this beautiful life. They truly understand what it means to push for excellence and secure a lasting family legacy." Patricia's eyes scanned the crowd and locked directly onto me, standing quietly in the back. Her smile thinned into a sharp, condescending line. "It is so important to have ambition in this world," she continued, her voice dripping with passive-aggressive venom. "Some people are perfectly content to settle for mediocrity, to stay stagnant in small apartments and play in the dirt with no real drive. But Brittany and Jamal remind us that true success belongs only to those who refuse to settle." A few of my parents' wealthy friends turned to look at me, offering those familiar glances of pity. I maintained steady eye contact with my mother, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. She desperately wanted me to act hurt or storm out in a rage, but I refused to give her the satisfaction. After the toast, the music turned up, and the guests dispersed to mingle. I was preparing to make my quiet exit when I overheard Jamal holding court near the outdoor bar. He was talking to a group of his colleagues, projecting his voice with absolute arrogance. "Look at her standing over there. Jamal sneered, nodding his head in my direction. My mother-in-law dragged her here out of pure pity. She runs some pathetic little gardening business. I actually offered her the chance to design this backyard, just to give her some free exposure, but she threw a massive fit because she is terrified of real hard work. One of his friends laughed, asking how I managed to get past the notoriously strict security gates. I have no earthly idea, Jamal scoffed loudly enough for half the patio to hear. With her bank account, she could not afford to rent a broom closet in this neighborhood. She probably told the guards she was here to pull the weeds. The entire group erupted in cruel laughter. Brittany walked over, wrapping her arms around Jamal's waist and giggling at the insult. My father stood a few feet away, hearing the entire exchange, and said absolutely nothing. He just took another sip of his scotch and turned his back on me. The complete lack of respect was staggering, but it no longer caused me any pain. It only fueled my resolve and confirmed that my plan was entirely justified. I set my glass down on a nearby table. I did not need to hear any more. I had seen everything I came to see. The golden couple was drowning in their own arrogance. Jamal was actively plotting to break federal environmental laws, and my parents were proudly funding the illusion. I walked out of the backyard, moving gracefully through the crowded house, and stepped out into the cool evening air. The valet brought my older sedan around. As I drove away from Lot 42, I glanced in the rearview mirror, watching the house fade into the distance. A genuine smile spread across my face. They thought they had won. They thought they had humiliated me in front of their elite friends. But they were throwing a party on my land, using my grandmother's stolen money while openly plotting to violate my legal contracts. Let them drink their champagne. Let them laugh. The real show was about to begin. Exactly 1 month passed since the disastrous housewarming party. During that time, Brittany transformed her social media accounts into a daily broadcast of her fabricated elite lifestyle. She posted meticulously staged photos, sipping artisan coffee on her pristine stone patio, carefully framing the shots to hide the actual property boundaries. But Jamal was growing increasingly restless. The beautiful house and the empty manicured lawn were simply not enough to satisfy his raging ego. He needed the ultimate status symbol to show off to his wealthy corporate finance peers. He needed the massive infinity pool, and he needed it immediately. Standard luxury contractors entirely refused to touch his project. Any legitimate builder operating in Westchester County knew that Crestview Estate required rigorous architectural reviews and extensive environmental permits before moving a single grain of dirt. When Jamal submitted his application for the 4th time, it was automatically denied by my automated homeowner association review system. His arrogance immediately took the wheel. He genuinely believed his corporate title and his illusion of vast wealth placed him completely above the law. So he went underground. He bypassed the legitimate commercial channels and sought out an unlicensed black market excavation crew. These were shadow contractors who dealt entirely in untraceable cash payments and asked absolutely zero questions about conservation covenants or legal property lines. I sat comfortably in my sleek executive office at the highest peak of the central manor. My expansive mahogany desk featured a state-of-the-art multi-monitor security array that tracked every single square inch of the Crestview Estate territory. My development firm did not merely rely on guards standing at a gate. We utilized top-tier environmental monitoring technology, thermal imaging cameras, ground vibration sensors, and high-definition drone surveillance continuously protected the highly delicate ecosystem of the valley below. It happened on a crisp Tuesday morning, just as I was reviewing my quarterly acquisition reports. A loud, sharp alarm echoed through my office suite. The main security screen directly in front of me flashed bright red with an urgent environmental breach notification. The location coordinates were unmistakable. Lot 42. I immediately tapped the silver intercom button on my desk, connecting directly to my head of security. Deploy the surveillance drones to the southern ridge, I instructed, my voice steady and completely devoid of panic. Give me a live aerial feed of the Davis property immediately. Within seconds, the high-resolution video feed populated on my largest monitor. The live footage was both horrifying and incredibly satisfying. A massive rusted yellow bulldozer had bypassed the main paved roads, plowing illegally through a restricted service access trail to reach Jamal's backyard. 6 men wearing unmarked hard hats were actively swinging heavy chainsaws and operating aggressive excavation machinery. They were not just digging a simple hole in the grass. They were aggressively tearing directly into the ancient federally protected oak grove that bordered the property. I watched in crystal clear, high definition as a majestic 100-year-old tree shuddered, cracked, and crashed violently to the forest floor. The destruction of the protected woodland was a direct, undeniable violation of state environmental laws and the ironclad homeowner association agreement Jamal had blindly signed. Jamal stood proudly on his stone patio holding a cup of coffee and actively recording the destruction on his smartphone. He was smiling widely, probably drafting an arrogant caption about building his dream outdoor oasis for his followers. He had absolutely no idea that he was actively documenting himself committing a severe environmental crime. The timber and mineral rights of that specific grove belonged strictly to the Crestview Conservation Trust. Destroying those ancient trees carried catastrophic financial penalties and potential federal criminal charges. My lead attorney, David, burst through my office doors holding a digital tablet. His face was a tight mask of pure corporate outrage. "Clara," he said, pointing aggressively at my monitors, "tell me you are seeing this right now. They brought heavy excavation machinery onto highly protected soil. They are completely destroying the vital root systems of the entire southern canopy. This is a blatant illegal violation of the contract." "I see it, David," I replied, leaning forward and steepling my fingers together. "Make sure our secure servers record every single second of this live feed. Back up the footage to the encrypted legal drive immediately. I want multiple clear camera angles showing Jamal directly supervising and authorizing the unlicensed crew. We need to send the armed security team down there right now to halt the construction," David urged, his protective legal instincts taking over completely. "If we do not stop them immediately, they are going to compromise the structural integrity of the entire hillside. The State Environmental Protection Board will absolutely have a field day with this kind of gross negligence." I shook my head slowly, keeping my eyes locked on the glowing monitor. "Do not send security down there yet. If we stop them right now, Jamal will just claim it was a simple misunderstanding about the property line markers. He will say the contractors made a foolish mistake, and he will try to pay a minor fine to make the whole problem disappear. I do not want a minor fine, David. I want an irrefutable, undeniable breach of contract. I want them to dig the hole so incredibly deep they can never possibly climb out." We watched in stunned silence as the black market crew continued their brutal work. They dragged the massive felled oak trees out of the way, and the heavy bulldozer sank its metal teeth deep into the protected soil. They were excavating a massive trench right over the restricted watershed zone. Every single scoop of dirt removed from that sacred ground added tens of thousands of dollars in federal fines to Jamal's rapidly growing tab. He was essentially digging his own financial grave while happily posting it to the internet. "Let them dig for exactly 48 hours. I told David, never looking away from the screen. "Let them pour the heavy concrete foundations. Let Jamal post his arrogant little videos bragging about his luxury lifestyle and his unique ability to bypass the rules of the wealthy elite. Give him enough rope to hang his entire finance career. Once the concrete cures completely, we will initiate the next phase of the protocol." David slowly lowered his tablet, a predatory smile, matching my own, spreading across his face. "You are going to let them bankrupt themselves paying untraceable cash for an illegal pool, and then you are going to drop the heaviest legal hammer this state has ever seen." "Exactly," I said softly. "Jamal thinks his corporate title makes him the smartest man in any room. He thinks the strict rules of this estate are just minor suggestions for people beneath him. He is about to learn a very expensive lesson about real property law and the unforgiving nature of a legally binding conservation contract." I turned my attention back to the high-definition screen, watching my arrogant brother-in-law proudly orchestrate his own spectacular downfall. The dominoes were falling exactly as I had planned, and there was absolutely nothing my toxic family could do to stop the impending crash. The reality of dealing with unlicensed underground contractors is that they do not operate on corporate credit or 30-day invoicing cycles. They operate strictly on cash, untraceable physical currency handed over in heavy duffel bags. I knew this industry inside and out. I knew exactly how these shadowy crews functioned when dealing with desperate, wealthy clients trying to bypass strict municipal zoning laws. For the first 2 days, the heavy machinery roared through the protected oak grove, tearing up the ancient root systems and digging a massive crater into the hillside. Jamal strutted around the perimeter of the destruction, pointing at the dirt and acting like a visionary architect. But by the afternoon of the third day, the roaring engines abruptly went completely silent. I sat in my office observing the drone feed as the burly foreman stepped down from his massive yellow bulldozer and approached Jamal on the pristine stone patio. Even without audio, the aggressive body language was universally clear. The foreman crossed his muscular arms, demanding his next scheduled payment. Jamal, wearing another ridiculously expensive designer silk shirt, attempted to use his corporate finance charm. He gestured wildly, patting the foreman on the shoulder, trying to negotiate a delay. He was likely spinning a complex lie about bank holds or wire transfer limits, but black market laborers do not care about corporate finance excuses. The foreman aggressively shoved Jamal's hand away, pointing directly at the massive jagged crater in the ground. He gave an ultimatum: pay the cash right now, or the crew walks away, leaving a highly illegal open excavation pit right in the middle of a heavily secured luxury estate. Jamal was completely trapped. His carefully constructed illusion of vast personal wealth had finally hit a solid brick wall. David, my lead attorney, had already briefed me on the precarious state of Jamal's finances. His credit cards were entirely maxed out from maintaining his fake elite lifestyle. The shadow accounts he had used to fake his homeowner association application were completely drained empty. He possessed zero liquid assets. He could not walk into a bank and request a legitimate construction loan because doing so would require an official property inspection and state permits, which he obviously did not have. He was a finance director who was entirely broke. The drone feed captured Jamal pulling at his hair in absolute panic as the foreman signaled his crew to turn off their equipment. The workers began throwing their tools into the back of their unmarked pickup trucks, preparing to abandon the site. That was when Brittany walked out onto the patio. She was holding her smartphone, likely preparing to record another bragging video for her social media followers. When she saw the contractors leaving and the massive ugly hole ruining her perfect aesthetic, she completely unraveled. She started screaming at Jamal, waving her arms frantically at the muddy crater. She had already ordered $40,000 worth of custom outdoor furniture on credit and had mailed out invitations for a lavish summer pool party. The thought of facing social humiliation among her new wealthy neighbors was her ultimate nightmare. Unable to handle the slightest amount of adversity, Brittany did exactly what she had done her entire life. She pulled out her phone and called our parents, crying hysterically and demanding to be rescued. I could only imagine the frantic, tear-filled conversation happening on the other end of that line. Brittany, playing the ultimate victim, claiming her dream home was being ruined by difficult laborers, and demanding that her parents fix the situation immediately. Miles away in their Connecticut suburb, Patricia and Richard received the frantic phone call. My parents had spent their entire lives obsessed with projecting a flawless image to their country club friends. They had built their entire identity around the fabricated narrative that their youngest daughter was a shining star, married to a highly successful financial executive. Facing the reality that Jamal was broke and their golden child was drowning in debt was simply unacceptable to them. They needed to maintain the illusion at all costs. Blinded by their obsession with Brittany's status and desperate to keep up appearances, they made the most financially reckless decision of their entire lives. They could not simply withdraw more cash from their savings because they had already drained their accounts to pay for Brittany's massive down payment. So they drove directly to their local bank and signed the paperwork to take out a second mortgage on their own longtime family home. They willingly leveraged the roof over their own heads, borrowing heavily against their only remaining tangible asset to secure a massive high-interest cash loan. They immediately wired the freshly borrowed funds directly into Jamal's personal checking account. Jamal wasted no time. He rushed to the bank, withdrew the funds in stacks of $100 bills, and handed the heavy envelope over to the unlicensed foreman. The rusted bulldozer fired back up, and the illegal excavation resumed its brutal destruction of the protected environmental zone. My parents felt incredibly proud of themselves. They believed they had saved the day, proving once again that they were the ultimate supportive parents to their golden child. The absolute sheer arrogance of their action demanded an audience. They could not just quietly bail out their favorite daughter. They had to use the moment to belittle me. My cell phone vibrated on my mahogany desk, the screen illuminated with a text message from my mother, Patricia. I picked up the device and read the paragraph she had typed out. "We just had to step in and save the day for your sister. Jamal encountered a minor banking delay with his contractors, so your father and I happily provided the capital to keep their beautiful luxury pool project moving forward. It is a massive investment, but we always support our children's dreams, unlike some bitter people who refuse to help their own family. You could learn a lot from our generosity, Clara." I read the text message twice, letting the sheer magnitude of their stupidity wash over me. My parents had just admitted in writing that they were directly funding an unauthorized, unpermitted black market construction project on highly protected conservation land. By wiring that money to Jamal to pay unlicensed contractors under the table, they had officially made themselves financial accessories to federal wire fraud and severe state environmental crimes. They had literally mortgaged their own future to fund a felony on my territory. I did not reply with anger. I did not try to warn them about the catastrophic legal storm they had just bought their way into. I simply took a high-resolution screenshot of the text message, ensuring the timestamp and sender information were clearly visible. I opened the encrypted digital file David had created for Lot 42 and uploaded the image directly into the evidence folder. I archived the text message, smiling coldly at the security monitors. The trap was no longer just for Jamal and Brittany. My parents had just happily locked themselves inside it. The automated compliance system of the Crestview estate operates with cold mechanical precision. By the fourth morning of the unauthorized excavation, the environmental sensors buried along the southern ridge had gathered enough geomatic data to trigger an automatic Class 1 violation. In my office, I watched the notification flash across my secondary monitor. I clicked a single button on my keyboard, authorizing the legal department to initiate the first formal warning. I wanted everything done by the book. Every legal box had to be perfectly checked, so that when the final blow landed, no judge in the state of New York would grant them an ounce of leniency. Down in the legal wing, David personally drafted the cease and desist order. It was not a polite request. It was a severe, legally binding mandate printed on heavy, watermarked corporate cardstock. It detailed the exact environmental statutes being violated, the precise coordinates of the destroyed protected oak trees, and the immediate daily fines accruing for every hour the excavation continued. I dispatched a private uniformed courier to deliver the document directly to the front door of Lot 42. Through the high-definition security cameras, I watched the courier pull up to the sprawling driveway. Jamal answered the door wearing a plush designer bathrobe. He signed for the heavy envelope with a look of supreme annoyance. I leaned closer to my monitors, watching his face as he tore open the seal and pulled out the legal warning. Any normal person reading a document threatening hundreds of thousands of dollars in environmental fines and potential property foreclosure would have panicked. They would have immediately run to the backyard and ordered the bulldozers to stop. But Jamal was not a normal person. He was a man completely intoxicated by his own fabricated elite status. His corporate finance ego convinced him that he was the smartest player in the game. I watched his eyes scan the harsh legal language. Instead of showing fear, a massive, arrogant smirk spread across his face. He actually laughed. He shook his head, crumpled the pristine legal document into a tight ball, and tossed it casually into a nearby recycling bin on his patio. He did not even bother showing it to Brittany. He simply pulled his smartphone from his pocket and made a call. I did not need audio to know exactly who he was dialing. My mother, Patricia, was always his favorite audience for his grand displays of masculine authority. Later that afternoon, my cousin Beverly, who despised my parents' constant bragging, texted me a complete transcript of the conversation Patricia had loudly repeated at a country club luncheon. According to Beverly, Jamal had called my mother to boast about how he handled the local homeowner association. He told Patricia that the developers had sent some pathetic little warning letter trying to scare him about pulling up a few old trees. He bragged loudly, asserting that rich developers never actually enforce these things, they just want to intimidate you. He claimed that massive real estate conglomerates just use automated letters to frighten middle-class buyers. But since he was a high-level financial executive, they would never dare take him to court. He insisted that wealthy people always bend the rules and that the developer was probably just posturing to assert dominance. My mother swallowed every single word of his arrogant delusion. She loudly praised Jamal to her wealthy friends, bragging about her strong, decisive son-in-law who knew how to handle corporate bullies. She completely ignored the very real threat of a massive lawsuit, convinced that Jamal's finance degree made him invincible. Patricia even boasted that true luxury required breaking a few minor rules, and that the beautiful infinity pool would be worth a silly little warning letter. Back at Lot 42, Jamal decided to double down on his spectacular ignorance. Instead of pausing the construction to consult a lawyer or assess the environmental damage, he marched straight out into the muddy crater in his backyard. The unlicensed contractors were currently taking a lunch break, sitting on the stumps of the ancient oaks they had just violently torn down. I watched the drone feed as Jamal aggressively clapped his hands together, barking orders at the burly foreman. He was pointing frantically at the massive hole in the ground, gesturing for them to work faster. He pulled another thick stack of $100 bills from his pocket, the very money my parents had mortgaged their home to provide, and shoved it into the foreman's chest. Jamal was demanding double shifts. He wanted the heavy machinery running non-stop through the night, ignoring the strict community noise ordinances. He wanted the concrete poured and the pool shell finalized before the weekend. He believed that if he finished the construction quickly, the homeowner association would just give up and accept the new backyard as a permanent fixture. It was a breathtaking display of pure, unadulterated hubris. In the world of high-end real estate development, unauthorized construction does not magically become legal just because you finish building it. If you build an illegal structure on protected conservation land, the courts do not just let you keep it. They force you to tear it down at your own expense, and then they fine you for the cost of restoring the natural habitat. I sat in my pristine executive office, sipping my coffee and watching the yellow bulldozer roar back to life. The heavy metal treads dug deeper into the sacred soil, tearing away the last remaining roots of the protected oak grove. For every scoop of dirt that machine removed, I mentally calculated the compounding federal fines. $50,000 for the disrupted watershed, $100,000 for the destroyed century-old trees, another $50,000 for operating heavy machinery without a municipal permit. Jamal was pushing the contractors to work twice as fast, which meant he was accumulating devastating legal and financial penalties at double the speed. He was acting exactly like a desperate gambler at a casino, doubling down on a losing hand because his ego refused to accept defeat. He thought he was outsmarting a faceless corporate entity. He had absolutely no idea that the developer he was actively defying was the exact same woman he had publicly humiliated just a few weeks ago. I did not send another warning letter. There was no need. The automated system had recorded the delivery of the cease and desist order, and the security cameras proved Jamal had willfully ignored it. He had crossed the line from accidental ignorance to intentional, malicious noncompliance. The legal foundation for my final strike was now utterly flawless. I picked up my desk phone and called David. They ignored the warning I told my lead attorney, my voice cold and precise. They are working double shifts now. Let them pour the concrete tonight. Tomorrow morning we initiate the financial kill switch. The sun had barely crest over the eastern ridge of the valley when David walked into my executive suite the following morning. He did not bring his usual digital tablet. Instead, he carried two massive physical binders, dropping them onto my mahogany desk with a heavy, ominous thud. His perfectly tailored suit looked slightly rumpled, indicating he had been up all night coordinating with our forensic accounting team. He poured himself a cup of black coffee from my sidebar and took a seat opposite my desk. His face was a mask of pure professional shock mixed with absolute legal fascination. "You were right, Clara," David said, taking a slow sip of his coffee. "Jamal Davis is not just an arrogant homeowner making bad construction choices. He is a walking federal indictment. The forensic audit is completely finished, and the sheer magnitude of his financial stupidity is actually breathtaking." I opened the first binder and began scanning the meticulously highlighted bank records and wire transfer logs. In the world of high-end real estate, the paper trail always tells the true story. I had expected to find a few doctored pay stubs or inflated asset portfolios. What David and his team had uncovered went significantly deeper than simple application fraud. Jamal had used his position as a corporate finance director to fabricate an entire shadow financial identity. He did not just tweak his tax returns to pass our homeowner association background check. He had actively forged institutional investment portfolios, utilizing letterheads and signature stamps stolen from his own employers. He created a completely fictional net worth to secure the deed to Lot 42. That initial deception alone constituted severe bank fraud and gross professional misconduct. If his firm discovered what he had done, he would be stripped of his finance license and immediately terminated. But that was merely the foundation of his rapidly collapsing house of cards. The second binder contained the truly devastating evidence. This binder tracked the money my parents had recklessly borrowed against their own home. When Richard and Patricia wired that massive cash injection to Jamal, they triggered a highly complex legal chain reaction. Jamal knew he could not simply write a massive check to an unlicensed underground excavation crew. Legitimate banks automatically flag massive sudden cash withdrawals, especially if they are unassociated with licensed permitted contractors. Jamal knew that a direct transfer would alert local municipal building authorities to his unpermitted pool project. So Jamal used his financial expertise to attempt a money laundering scheme. He routed the funds borrowed by my parents through 3 different shell companies. He generated fake vendor invoices for consulting services that never actually existed. He washed the money through these dummy limited liability companies before finally withdrawing the untraceable cash to hand over to the black market foreman. David leaned forward, tapping his finger against a specific routing number on the page. By intentionally filtering those funds across state lines through fraudulent business accounts to pay unlicensed laborers, Jamal officially crossed the line from a civil community dispute into federal wire fraud and tax evasion. He created a criminal conspiracy to defraud both the bank and the municipal government. I stared at the transaction dates mapping out the timeline in my head. "And my parents?" I asked, my voice remaining entirely clinical. "What is their exact level of liability in this specific financial chain?" David pulled a single sheet of paper from the back of the folder. "Patricia and Richard are entirely compromised. When they requested the second mortgage, they specifically signed documents stating the funds were for home improvements. However, they then wired those exact funds to Jamal with memos explicitly referencing the pool construction at Crestview. Because they knowingly provided the capital for an illegal, unpermitted project, and because Jamal subsequently laundered that specific capital, they are legally classified as financial accessories to the fraud. They tethered their own home equity directly to a federal crime." I closed the binder, feeling a cold, rigid sense of finality settle over me. My parents had spent my entire life protecting and enabling the golden child. They had mocked my career, stolen my grandmother's trust fund, and belittled my modest lifestyle. They had willingly mortgaged their own safe, secure future just to fund Brittany's superficial vanity project. Now their blind devotion had legally chained them to a sinking ship. There was one final catastrophic element to Jamal's grand illusion: the environmental destruction. The towering oak trees his hired crew had violently torn out of the earth were not simply decorative plants protected by a local homeowner association. David presented the updated ecological survey conducted overnight by our security drones. The ancient grove on Lot 42 served as a primary anchor for the protected regional watershed. By excavating a massive crater into that specific hillside, without proper state environmental impact studies, Jamal had severely compromised the structural integrity of the surrounding ecosystem. The Environmental Protection Agency mandates catastrophic penalties for this level of unauthorized destruction. The baseline fine for uprooting the watershed anchor was $250,000. That did not include the daily compounding penalties for operating heavy machinery without a permit or the mandatory restorative landscaping costs, which would easily exceed $500,000. Jamal thought he was untouchable. He believed his tailored suits and his aggressive corporate attitude placed him completely above the laws that governed ordinary people. He had arrogantly thrown my legal cease and desist order into the trash, boasting to my mother that rich developers only wanted to intimidate people. He had pushed his unlicensed crew to work double shifts, digging his illegal pool deeper and wider into the restricted soil. Every single decision he made had been driven by pure, unchecked ego, and every single decision had perfectly stacked the dominoes against him. He had handed me a fully loaded weapon with his own fingerprints covering the trigger. The Civil Homeowner Association dispute was effectively over. It had mutated into a multi-agency legal nightmare involving federal wire fraud, severe tax evasion document forgery, and critical environmental code violations. Jamal was looking at complete financial ruin, the permanent loss of his professional career, and a very high probability of federal prison time. Brittany was about to lose her fake luxury lifestyle and face the harsh reality of complete bankruptcy. My parents were going to lose the home they had lived in for 30 years, all because they could not stand the thought of telling their favorite daughter no. I looked across the desk at David. The morning light was fully streaming through the glass walls of my office, illuminating the devastating legal documents spread before us. The trap was locked. The evidence was irrefutable. Prepare the final eviction notices and draft the financial penalties, I instructed David, handing the binders back to him. Contact the municipal inspectors and alert them to the unpermitted excavation site. Today we stop watching the screen. Today we pull the trigger. The execution of our legal strike was swift and absolute. I simply turned my attention back to the high-definition security monitors and watched the meticulously coordinated deployment of consequence. Down in the valley lot, 42 was buzzing with morning activity. The unlicensed contractors had arrived early, eager to secure their next cash payment. The massive yellow bulldozer was already roaring, tearing blindly into the remaining root systems of the ancient oak grove. Brittany was likely inside the house, perfecting her morning makeup routine, while Jamal was probably admiring his reflection before his commute to his corporate finance firm. At precisely 8 in the morning, the heavy iron gates of the Crestview estate opened to admit a very specific convoy. I had personally authorized the entry of 3 municipal vehicles from the Westchester County Department of Buildings, along with 2 white vans from the State Environmental Protection Agency. They were flanked by 4 of my own private security cruisers, their amber lights flashing aggressively as they navigated the winding private roads. The convoy moved with military precision, heading straight for the southern ridge. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my mahogany desk, watching the live feed. The convoy pulled into the sprawling driveway of Lot 42, effectively blocking the exit. A dozen people stepped out of the vehicles. There were city inspectors in hard hats, armed estate security personnel in dark uniforms, and environmental agents wearing bright yellow vests. They marched past the imported luxury cars and headed directly toward the deafening roar of the backyard excavation pit. The underground foreman spotted the official vehicles first. He immediately recognized the distinct uniforms of the state environmental agents. The foreman aggressively waved his arms, blowing a loud whistle to signal his crew. The men dropped their shovels and chainsaws instantly. The bulldozer driver killed the engine, abandoning the heavy machinery right in the middle of the muddy crater. The workers scrambled toward their unmarked pickup trucks, desperate to flee the property, before the inspectors could demand their non-existent commercial licenses. But my security team had already secured the perimeter, effectively trapping the illegal crew on site for questioning. The sudden silence in the backyard must have alerted the homeowners. The heavy glass patio doors slid open and Jamal stormed outside. He was wearing his expensive tailored suit jacket, holding a leather briefcase, clearly on his way to work. His face contorted into a mask of pure, arrogant fury as he saw the inspectors surrounding his precious swimming pool project. "What the hell is going on here?" Jamal shouted, marching across the stone patio with the aggressive posture of a man who believed he owned the world. "Who authorized you people to block my driveway? I am a senior finance director and this is private property. I demand you remove these vehicles immediately." The lead city inspector, a burly man who had absolutely zero patience for corporate entitlement, stepped forward and held up his official badge. He did not flinch at Jamal's hostile tone. "Jamal Davis," he asked, his voice booming across the torn-up lawn. "I am the chief building inspector for Westchester County. We received a report of unauthorized excavation and severe environmental damage. You are currently operating heavy machinery and moving massive amounts of earth without a single municipal permit." Jamal scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "I am dealing with the homeowner association regarding the permits. It is a private civil matter. You city officials have no jurisdiction behind these private gates. Now tell your men to step aside so my contractors can finish their job." The inspector did not step aside. Instead, he pulled a thick stack of bright red stop work orders from his clipboard. "This is not a civil matter, Mr. Davis. You have hired unlicensed laborers to illegally excavate protected state conservation land. I am issuing an immediate unappealable stop work mandate. Your site is officially shut down. Any further construction will result in immediate criminal arrest." The inspector began slapping the bright red stickers onto the abandoned bulldozer and the patio doors. Before Jamal could even process the municipal shutdown, the head of my Crestview legal team stepped forward, holding a heavy manila envelope. Jamal's arrogant sneer began to falter as he recognized the distinct watermarked crest of the estate's corporate management. "Mr. Davis," the Crestview attorney said smoothly, handing the envelope directly to Jamal. "On behalf of the Crestview estate developer, you are hereby served with a formal notice of critical contract breach. Your unauthorized destruction of the ancient oak grove has severely compromised the protected regional watershed. The homeowner association is levying an immediate environmental damage fine of $250,000 payable within 14 days. Jamal physically recoiled, staring at the heavy envelope as if it were a venomous snake. $250,000. That is insane. You cannot fine me $250,000 for pulling up a few dead trees. I will sue this entire development for harassment." "You are welcome to try," the attorney replied, his voice perfectly calm and devoid of sympathy. "However, you should read the second document in that packet first. Because you secured the deed to this property using fraudulent financial statements, and because you have fundamentally violated the environmental conservation clauses of your purchase agreement, the developer is officially initiating immediate foreclosure proceedings. You have 48 hours to vacate the premises before we authorize forceful eviction." Brittany walked out onto the patio just in time to hear the word eviction. She was wearing a silk robe, holding her smartphone ready to record her daily morning vlog. She stopped dead in her tracks, staring at the swarm of uniformed authorities invading her perfect luxury oasis. The red stopwork stickers slapped across her pristine glass doors clashed violently with her carefully curated aesthetic. "Jamal, what is happening?" Brittany shrieked, dropping her phone onto the outdoor sofa. "Why are there police in our backyard? What do they mean eviction? Tell them to leave right now." Jamal could not speak. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and sickly. His custom-tailored suit suddenly seemed much too large for his shrinking frame. He opened the envelope with trembling fingers, his eyes darting frantically across the dense legal text. The $250,000 fine, the municipal citations, the formal foreclosure notice. The absolute totality of his financial ruin was printed in crisp black ink. His fake empire had just imploded in a matter of seconds. The black market foreman was currently being handcuffed by the city inspectors for operating an illegal commercial enterprise, while the environmental agents took soil samples from the massive, jagged crater. The beautiful backyard was now an active crime scene and a toxic liability. Brittany grabbed Jamal's arm, shaking him violently, demanding answers he could not possibly provide. The golden child's perfect world was burning to the ground right in front of her eyes. I sat in my quiet office watching the entire spectacular collapse unfold on my monitors. The panic had finally set in. They were trapped, they were bankrupt, and they had absolutely no idea that the worst was yet to come. My personal cell phone began to vibrate violently against the polished wood of my desk less than an hour after the inspectors cleared the property. The caller ID flashed with my sister's name. I let it ring. I watched the screen light up again and again as her desperate calls went unanswered. Then came the voicemails. I pressed play on the first audio message, listening to my mother's shrill voice echoing through my quiet office. "Clara, you vindictive, jealous little girl," my mother shrieked into the receiver. "Jamal just told us what happened with the city inspectors. We know you called them. We know you reported your own sister out of pure spite because you could not stand seeing her live in a luxury estate while you plant bushes for a living. You have completely ruined her life and jeopardized the money your father and I invested. Do not ever bother calling us again. You are officially disowned. You are no longer a part of this family." I deleted the voicemail with a quick swipe of my finger, feeling absolutely nothing. Disowning me was a hollow threat when I had already walked away. My phone immediately rang again. This time I pressed the green button and answered. "You are a monster!" Brittany screamed into the phone, her voice entirely hoarse from crying. "You are an absolutely pathetic snitch, Clara. You saw my beautiful backyard at the housewarming party, and you just could not handle it. You called the municipal board because you wanted to destroy my happiness. Jamal is facing a $250,000 fine and they are trying to evict us. You ruined my dream home." I listened to her hysterical sobbing as she continued to hurl baseless accusations. She genuinely believed my only power in this world was making a petty phone call to a local zoning board. She thought I was just a bitter bystander watching her glamorous life from the cheap seats. I waited patiently until she paused to gasp for air. "Are you quite finished, Brittany?" I asked, my voice remaining completely ice-cold and perfectly steady. "How can you be so heartless?" she wailed, ignoring my question. "We are going to lose everything because the developer is a tyrant and you tipped off the city. Jamal says we have to beg the homeowner association for mercy, but we cannot even get a direct phone number for the corporate office." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my desk, and stared out the window toward the valley. "If you and Jamal truly want to resolve this massive legal disaster with the developer, I can easily arrange it," I said smoothly, cutting through her frantic sobbing. "Come directly up to the main estate at the very top of the hill tomorrow morning at exactly 10. Tell the security guards at the third checkpoint you have a scheduled meeting. I will personally make sure that you both get an immediate and exclusive audience with the big boss." The following morning, Brittany spent 2 hours meticulously preparing for her grand audience with the elusive billionaire developer. She dressed in her most expensive designer clothes, selecting a pristine white Chanel blazer and a highly recognizable Hermès handbag. She wanted to project the exact image of a wealthy, helpless victim who had been horribly wronged by incompetent contractors and a jealous older sister. In her delusional mind, she genuinely believed I had spent the entire night begging a powerful corporate magnate to grant my family a sliver of mercy. She was already rehearsing her tearful apologies, fully intending to sweet-talk the developer into dropping the catastrophic environmental fines. More importantly, she planned to completely throw me under the bus, spinning a narrative that I was a bitter landscaping employee who had maliciously reported her out of spite. Leaving a panicked Jamal behind at their foreclosed property, Brittany slid into the driver's seat of their leased Porsche and began the steep ascent toward the summit of the Crestview estate. The drive from the lower residential valley to the central manor was a masterclass in psychological intimidation. The private road wound tightly around the mountain, flanked by towering ancient pine trees and sheer rock drops. As she approached the first security checkpoint, a team of armed guards in tactical uniforms stepped out to block the road. Brittany confidently rolled down her window, stating she had a scheduled 10 o'clock meeting. The guards thoroughly inspected her vehicle, scanned her license plate, and silently waved her through. She drove another mile up the escalating elevation before hitting the second heavily fortified checkpoint. Here, the security protocols were even more severe, requiring clearance from the staff before the heavy steel barricades slowly parted. By the time she reached the third and final checkpoint, Brittany was visibly trembling behind the steering wheel. The sheer magnitude of the wealth and power protecting the summit was entirely beyond her comprehension. She had always bragged about living in a luxury neighborhood, but the lower valley lots were absolutely nothing compared to the solitary fortress at the peak. The final iron gates swung open, revealing the massive $15 million central manor. The architectural masterpiece of glass and dark stone sat perfectly integrated into the cliffside, overlooking the entire county. Brittany parked the Porsche in the expansive circular driveway, staring in absolute awe at the cascading water features and the fleet of black corporate SUVs lined up near the entrance. She took a deep breath, adjusting her designer blazer and clutching her handbag like a protective shield. She marched up the sprawling granite steps, convinced she was about to charm a ruthless billionaire into saving her fabricated luxury lifestyle. She had absolutely no idea she was walking straight into the slaughterhouse. An executive assistant met Brittany at the massive glass entrance doors of the central manor. She simply checked her digital tablet, verified the name, and gestured for my sister to follow her through the cavernous foyer. Brittany walked across the imported marble floors, her high heels clicking loudly, echoing through the vast silent space. The sheer scale of the interior was designed specifically to intimidate. Vaulted ceilings soaring 40 feet high displayed custom glass chandeliers, while original artwork lined the dark stone walls. Brittany clutched her handbag tighter, clearly feeling the oppressive environment. The assistant guided her down a long corridor and finally pushed open a set of heavy double oak doors. Brittany stepped into the grand boardroom. The space was completely enclosed by floor-to-ceiling glass walls, offering an unobstructed panoramic view of the entire residential valley below. Right in the center sat a $50,000 mahogany conference table surrounded by black leather chairs. The assistant instructed Brittany to take a seat at the far end of the table and then silently left the room, closing the heavy oak doors behind her with a definitive thud. Left entirely alone, Brittany immediately pulled out her smartphone. I watched her through the discreet security cameras positioned in the ceiling corners. She checked her reflection in the dark screen, quickly fixing a stray strand of hair and adjusting the collar of her white blazer. She took deep breaths, rehearsing the tearful victim routine she planned to unleash on the elusive billionaire. She sat tapping her fingernails against the polished mahogany, impatiently waiting for her savior to arrive. 5 minutes passed. The tension in the quiet boardroom grew palpable. Then the heavy double oak doors swung open. I walked into the room. I wore an immaculate tailored charcoal suit, sharp and authoritative, projecting absolute control. My posture was rigid, my expression entirely unreadable. Flanking me on my right was David, my lead corporate attorney, holding a thick leather binder. On my left were 2 additional senior litigators, both dressed in severe dark suits carrying legal documentation. We moved in perfect unison, radiating a cold corporate hostility that sucked the oxygen out of the room. Brittany blinked rapidly, her rehearsed victim expression instantly dropping into a mask of pure confusion. She stared at me as we marched past the empty leather chairs. She looked at David, then at the other 2 attorneys, entirely unable to process the visual information in front of her. Why was her older sister walking into a billionaire's boardroom flanked by intimidating lawyers? I walked directly to the head of the mahogany table, the single oversized leather executive chair positioned at the peak of the room. I pulled it out and sat down. David and the litigators took their seats beside me, opening their binders. Brittany let out a nervous laugh. "What are you doing, Clara?" she asked, laced with sudden irritation. "You cannot just march in here and sit in the boss chair. Are you completely insane? Get up before the owner walks in and throws us out. You always embarrass me." I did not move. I simply rested my elbows on the polished wood and steepled my fingers together, staring directly into her panicked eyes. Brittany slammed her hand against the table. "Did you hear me, Clara? Get out of that chair. You think because you begged some secretary to let me in here that you can just play pretend. You are wearing a business suit like you are some kind of executive. It is pathetic. The city inspectors are taking my house and you are playing dress up. Tell these lawyers to fetch the real developer so I can explain the pool contractors. I maintained my steady, unbreakable gaze. The silence stretched between us heavy and suffocating. David turned a page in his binder, the crisp sound slicing through the quiet room. I am the boss, Brittany. I said, my voice dropping to a low, icy register. I own Crestview. Brittany froze, no sound coming out. She stared at my face, searching for a punchline, searching for the familiar sign of sibling rivalry or a bitter joke. But she found absolutely nothing but cold, hard reality. That is not funny, she whispered, her voice shaking. Jamal said the developer is a ruthless billionaire. He said some massive corporation owns all this land. You plant bushes, Clara. You live in a tiny apartment. David slid a heavy certified document across the vast expanse of the mahogany table. It stopped precisely in front of her designer handbag. Brittany looked down at the paper. It was the master deed of incorporation for the Crestview estate. The primary shareholder, the sole listed owner, and the chief executive officer was printed in bold black ink. Clara Davis. My development firm acquired this entire valley 5 years ago, I explained methodically. I wrote the environmental conservation laws you violated. I drafted the homeowner association guidelines Jamal submitted fraudulent documents to bypass. I am the entity that authorized the $250,000 fine you received this morning, and I am the developer who is officially foreclosing on your property today. The color completely drained from her face. Her perfectly applied makeup suddenly looked like a tragic mask painted over pure terror. The arrogant illusion she had built her entire identity around shattered into a million irreparable pieces. She looked at the deed, then back at my face. The realization hit her with the destructive force of a freight train. The sister she had mocked, bullied, and humiliated for 34 years held the absolute power to destroy her life with a single signature. You! She gasped, clutching the edge of the table as if the floor had suddenly dropped out from beneath her. It is you. It has always been you. Yes, Brittany, I replied, my voice completely devoid of any sympathy. It is definitely me. Now let us quietly discuss the specific federal crimes your arrogant husband committed on my property. Brittany could not process the words. Federal crimes. My property. The cognitive dissonance was simply too massive for her superficial brain to handle. She sat completely frozen in the black leather executive chair, staring blankly at the certified corporate deed I had slid across the mahogany table. Her eyes tracked over my name printed in bold black ink again and again, as if desperately hoping the letters would magically rearrange themselves into a different reality. The arrogant smirk she had worn into the boardroom had vanished entirely, replaced by a mask of absolute sheer terror. Her breathing grew shallow and rapid. She began to hyperventilate, the meticulously crafted facade of the wealthy socialite completely melting away. Beneath the designer blazer and the expensive jewelry, she was just a terrified, helpless child who had always relied on her parents to rescue her from the consequences of her own terrible actions. She looked at David, who was watching her with the predatory stillness of a highly seasoned corporate litigator. She looked at the other 2 attorneys who were actively organizing the foreclosure documents and eviction notices. Finally, her wide, panicked eyes snapped back to my face, searching for any hint of mercy or sibling affection. She found absolutely none. Her hands began shaking so violently that her heavy designer handbag slipped from her grasp and hit the floor, spilling expensive cosmetics and car keys across the imported marble. She did not even flinch at the sudden noise. Instead, she frantically dug her smartphone out of her blazer pocket. She practically hammered the glass screen with her manicured thumb, desperately dialing the only person who had ever protected her from reality. My mother. The phone rang loudly, echoing through the dead, silent boardroom. The speaker volume was turned up just enough for everyone at the table to hear the line connect. My mother answered on the second ring, her voice dripping with artificial confidence and eager anticipation. Brittany, darling, did you get the meeting with the developer? My mother asked, her tone bright and sharp. Tell me you got those ridiculous fines dropped and put those awful inspectors in their place. Jamal is going to be so relieved when you fix this mess. Brittany gasped for air, her chest heaving as pure, unfiltered hysteria took total control of her body. Hey, Mom, you have to see this right now. She wailed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her flawless makeup. Clara isn't a gardener, she owns everything. I sat perfectly still, watching the utter destruction of her lifelong superiority complex. I did not smile. I did not gloat. The absolute detachment I felt in that moment was far more powerful than any simmering anger could ever be. For 34 years, my family had constructed a toxic narrative where I was the ultimate failure and Brittany was the undisputed success. That entire carefully maintained mythology was burning to the ground right in front of my eyes, and I was the one holding the match. My mother's voice cracked through the phone speaker, sharp and immediately defensive. Brittany, what on earth are you talking about? Stop crying and make sense right now. Where is the billionaire developer? Did they kick you out of the office? It is her mom! Brittany screamed, her voice breaking into a panicked shriek. Clara is the developer. She is the billionaire. She owns the Crestview estate. She owns my house. She owns all of it. And she has these terrifying lawyers in suits surrounding her, and they are talking about federal crimes and wire fraud. Mom, we are going to lose everything. There was a long, heavy pause on the line. I could easily picture my mother standing in her pristine Connecticut kitchen, clutching her phone tightly, trying to make sense of a reality that completely shattered her entire worldview. The golden child was supposed to be the victor. The older sister was supposed to be the failure. The script had been violently flipped, and my mother's brain could not compute the data. Put her on the phone, my mother finally demanded, her tone shifting from confused to aggressively hostile. Put your jealous sister on the phone right this second. I know she is playing some kind of sick trick on you. Brittany slid the phone across the smooth expanse of the mahogany table toward me, her hand still trembling uncontrollably. I did not reach for it. I simply leaned slightly forward, letting my voice carry clearly across the wood and into the microphone. I am right here, Patricia, I said, intentionally using her first name instead of calling her Mom. The shift in title established the new dynamic immediately and permanently. I was no longer her subordinate daughter seeking her elusive approval. I was the chief executive officer of a massive real estate empire, terminating a fraudulent business arrangement. Clara, what kind of twisted sick joke are you playing on your sister? My mother shrieked, her voice vibrating with rage. Have you completely lost your mind? Did you break into some corporate office to stage this pathetic prank just to scare her? I am going to call the police right now and have you arrested for trespassing and harassment. David, my lead attorney, leaned closer to the phone. His voice was smooth, professional, and absolutely lethal. Patricia Davis, my name is David, and I am the lead corporate litigator for Crestview Developments. I can assure you this is not a prank or a misunderstanding. Your daughter Clara is the sole legal owner and founder of this estate, and you should be far more concerned about the authorities arriving at your own doorstep than hers. My mother gasped, the sound sharp and highly audible over the speaker. Who are you? What are you talking about? We have not done anything wrong. We are talking about federal wire fraud. Patricia Y interrupted, keeping my tone entirely clinical and detached. We are talking about the second mortgage you and Richard secretly took out on your house. We are talking about the $300,000 trust fund you emptied to buy Jamal a fake lifestyle. We know you wired those specific funds directly to his account so he could pay unlicensed black market contractors under the table to illegally excavate protected environmental land. That is our money! My mother screamed, panic finally creeping into her aggressive tone. We can do whatever we want with our money. We were helping our children build their dream home because Jamal is actually successful. You are just jealous because we never gave you a dime of that trust fund. You did not just spend your money, Patricia David stated firmly, cutting through her hysterical screaming. You knowingly provided capital for an unauthorized, unpermitted construction project that severely damaged a federally protected regional watershed. Jamal then laundered your money through shell companies to hide it from municipal authorities. Because you explicitly tied those funds to the Crestview property and the illegal excavation, you are now legally classified as financial accessories to a federal crime. Brittany let out a loud, dramatic sob, burying her face in her hands. The realization that her parents were also going down with the sinking ship finally hit her. She had always relied on their financial safety net, but now she realized she had actively dragged them into her catastrophic disaster. They had no money left to save her, because they had already given it all to Jamal. "I suggest you pack a bag, Patricia," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh, unyielding whisper. The state environmental inspectors have already shut down Brittany's house. The Municipal Building Authority has issued mandatory stop work orders, and the Crestview Homeowner Association is officially foreclosing on the property due to gross breach of contract. Jamal is going to need a very expensive criminal defense attorney to avoid prison time, and since you gave him all your equity, I highly doubt you can afford to bail him out this time. "You cannot do this to us!" My mother wailed, the crushing reality of her impending bankruptcy finally setting in. "We are your family, Clara. You have to stop this immediately. Call off your lawyers. Tell the inspectors it was a terrible mistake. We will fill the hole back in. We will plant new trees. Just fix this right now." I looked at Brittany, who was staring at me with wide, terrified eyes, begging me silently for the mercy she had never once shown me. I thought about the decades of subtle insults, the stolen trust fund, the housewarming party, where they relentlessly mocked my modest lifestyle. They had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small. Now they were begging me to make them invisible to the law. "I cannot fix federal crimes, Patricia," I replied, my voice perfectly steady and utterly cold. "And even if I could, I absolutely would not. You made an investment in the family brand, just like Jamal said. Now you get to experience the exact return on that investment." I gestured to David. He reached forward and tapped the red button on the smartphone, instantly cutting off my mother's frantic, hysterical screaming. The boardroom plunged back into absolute, suffocating silence. Brittany stared at the black screen of her phone, her chest heaving as she struggled to breathe. The golden child was finally completely, entirely broken. Exactly 40 minutes passed. The heavy silence in the glass-walled boardroom was broken only by the sound of Brittany taking jagged, shallow breaths. She remained slumped in the black leather chair, her designer handbag forgotten on the imported marble floor. David and my other two litigators sat perfectly still, organizing their legal binders with quiet efficiency. I simply watched the second hand on my expensive watch sweep around the dial. I had given security explicit instructions to allow my family's vehicles through the outer gates. I wanted them all in this room. I wanted them completely cornered. The sudden commotion echoed down the long corridor outside. The sound of aggressive, heavy footsteps and raised voices approached the boardroom. The heavy double oak doors were violently shoved open, hitting the wall with a loud crack. Jamal stormed into the room, closely followed by my mother and father. The absolute panic radiating from all three of them was palpable. Jamal had clearly rushed straight from the chaotic excavation site in his backyard. The bottom of his expensive, tailored trousers was splattered with wet mud, and his custom silk shirt clung to his chest with nervous sweat. My mother looked entirely frantic, her hair disheveled from the manic drive up the mountain. My father trailed slightly behind his face, pale and drawn. Jamal immediately attempted to assert total dominance. He was a man who relied entirely on loud corporate finance intimidation tactics to mask his own profound insecurities. He marched straight to the center of the room, completely ignoring Brittany, who was still quietly sobbing. He slammed both of his hands down flat onto the polished surface of the $50,000 mahogany table, leaning forward aggressively to glare directly into my eyes. He was trying to use his physical presence to shrink me back into the obedient, subservient sister-in-law he thought I was. "What kind of insane scam are you running here, Clara?" Jamal bellowed, his deep voice reverberating against the glass walls. "Do you honestly think you can rent out a conference room and hire some actors in cheap suits to intimidate a senior finance director? You are completely out of your mind. I am going to have you arrested for criminal harassment and corporate impersonation. You think sending fake municipal inspectors to my house is funny? I will bury you in civil lawsuits until you are begging for a job pulling weeds." I did not flinch. I did not blink. I maintained steady eye contact with him, letting his aggressive posturing wash over me without making a single dent in my composure. My absolute lack of a defensive reaction seemed to infuriate him even more. "Who authorized you to send eviction notices?" Jamal continued, his face turning a dangerous shade of red as his voice grew louder. "You do not own Crestview. You are a broke landscaper who drives a trashy car. You could not even afford the application fee to step foot in this neighborhood. I know real wealth. Clara, and you are just a pathetic fraud trying to ruin my life because you are jealous of my success. I am calling my firm's legal team right now, and they are going to tear your fake little gardening business to shreds." Before I could even offer a response, my mother rushed forward, shoving past Jamal to claim her own space at the table. Patricia was entirely unwilling to relinquish her position as the ultimate authority figure in my life. She pointed a trembling finger directly at my face, attempting to project the fierce parental dominance she had used to control me for 34 years. "You stop this ridiculous charade right this instant, Clara!" My mother shrieked, her voice echoing sharply. "I am your mother, and I demand that you drop this sick prank. How dare you put your sister through this kind of emotional distress? She is sitting here crying because of your petty vindictive games. You are going to stand up from that chair right now, apologize to Jamal, and tell those fake inspectors to leave his property alone." My father stepped up beside her, trying to bolster her demands with his own hollow authority. "Your mother is absolutely right, Clara. This has gone way too far. We knew you were bitter about the trust fund, but staging an elaborate hoax to scare your sister is simply unacceptable. We demand you call off whoever you paid to harass Jamal this morning. We are not leaving this room until you fix the mess you just caused at their house." Patricia slammed her own hand on the table, mirroring Jamal's aggressive stance. "You listen to me very carefully, Clara. If you do not end this stunt right now, I will permanently cut you out of this family. I will make sure you never receive a single dime of inheritance. We will never speak to you again. You will be entirely alone in this world. Now fix this. Fix your sister's backyard and apologize to your brother-in-law for wasting his valuable time." I let them scream. I sat perfectly still at the head of the mahogany table, letting their furious demands, their empty threats, and their desperate attempts at intimidation completely exhaust themselves. I wanted them to use up every single ounce of their false authority. I watched Jamal pace back and forth, muttering angry financial jargon. I watched my mother breathe heavily, her chest heaving from the exertion of her own screaming fit. I watched my father shift uncomfortably, realizing that none of their usual manipulation tactics were working. Slowly, the shouting began to taper off. The room fell into a heavy, strained silence. The only sounds remaining were Brittany's quiet sniffling and the ragged breathing of my parents and Jamal. They stared at me, waiting for the inevitable apology, waiting for the obedient daughter to finally break under the intense pressure and submit to their demands. I slowly unsteepled my hands. I reached over to the thick, heavy leather folder sitting precisely on the right side of my desk pad. David, my lead attorney, shifted slightly in his chair, preparing for the final blow. I placed my hand flat on top of the folder, and with one smooth, calculated motion, I slid it directly across the long expanse of the mahogany table. It glided over the polished wood and stopped perfectly dead center right between Jamal and my mother. The heavy leather folder sat perfectly still in the exact center of the mahogany table. For a long, agonizing moment, nobody moved. Jamal stared down at the thick stack of papers, his chest heaving, as the adrenaline of his recent shouting match began to curdle into genuine apprehension. He reached out with a trembling hand and flipped open the heavy cover. The very first page was a copy of the deed to Lot 42, but it was heavily redacted and stamped with the bright red seal of the Crestview Legal Department, indicating immediate foreclosure. Before Jamal could even process the warning stamped across the page, David stood up from his chair. My lead corporate attorney buttoned his suit jacket, adjusting his posture to command absolute authority over the room. His voice cut through the tense silence like a sharpened blade. "My name is David, and I am the lead corporate litigator for Crestview Developments. David announced, projecting his voice to ensure every single person at the table heard him clearly. "You are not here to negotiate. You are here to receive formal notification of the catastrophic legal and financial liabilities you have incurred. This folder contains irrefutable proof of multiple civil and federal offenses committed by everyone standing on your side of the table." Jamal tried to scoff, attempting to maintain his aggressive facade. "This is a joke. You cannot just invent charges because you are mad about a landscaping dispute. I am a finance director. I know my rights." David ignored the interruption entirely. He tapped a manicured finger directly onto the first section of the open folder. "Let us begin with the initial homeowner association application." David stated, his tone entirely clinical. "Jamal Davis, you submitted highly manipulated tax returns and fabricated bank statements to bypass the strict liquidity requirements of the Crestview estate. You utilized stolen letterheads from your own employer to create phantom assets. That is not a simple landscaping dispute. That is severe application fraud and document forgery. We have already contacted your firm's compliance department to verify the irregularities. They confirmed the forgery. You have effectively destroyed your own professional career before this meeting even began." Jamal physically recoiled as if he had been struck. The blood began to drain from his face. His mouth opened to form a denial, but no sound emerged. He knew exactly what he had submitted to the application portal. He knew the documents were completely fake, and he suddenly realized that a multi-million-dollar development firm possessed the exact resources required to expose him. My mother, Patricia, leaned forward, her voice shrill and desperate. "That is a misunderstanding. Jamal makes plenty of money. He just needed to expedite the process because we wanted to secure the lot. You cannot punish him for being eager to move his family into a nice neighborhood." David turned his sharp gaze directly toward my mother. "Patricia Davis, your attempt to minimize document forgery is irrelevant because the second charge directly implicates you and your husband." David flipped to the next section of the folder, revealing highlighted bank transfer records and wire receipts. "This brings us to the federal wire fraud and money laundering conspiracy." My father Richard gripped the back of Jamal's leather chair, his knuckles turning completely white. "Money laundering. We just loaned our son-in-law some cash to pay his pool contractors. There is absolutely nothing illegal about helping family." "There is everything illegal about how you executed the transfer," David corrected swiftly. "You and Patricia leveraged your primary residence, taking out a massive second mortgage under the explicit premise of funding home improvements. You then wired those specific funds directly into Jamal's personal account. Jamal knew he could not pay unlicensed black market laborers with a traceable bank check without alerting municipal building authorities. So he routed your money through 3 different shell companies, utilizing fake vendor invoices for consulting services that never existed. He washed your home equity through dummy limited liability companies to extract untraceable cash." David leaned forward, placing both hands firmly on the table. "By intentionally filtering those funds across state lines to avoid municipal building permits and tax obligations, Jamal committed federal wire fraud. And because you explicitly provided the capital for that exact transaction, you and Richard are legally classified as financial accessories to a felony. You mortgaged your own safe, secure future to fund a criminal conspiracy on my client's property." The absolute horror of the situation finally penetrated my parents' profound ignorance. My mother covered her mouth with both hands, a muffled sob escaping her throat. My father looked as if he was going to collapse right there on the imported marble floor. They had sacrificed their entire life savings and their only remaining asset to uphold an illusion. And now they were facing severe criminal liability. But David was not finished. He flipped to the final section of the folder, displaying the high-definition drone photographs of the devastated backyard. "The third and final charge is the immediate environmental damage fine," David announced, his voice echoing relentlessly. "You hired an underground crew to illegally excavate a protected regional watershed zone. You authorized the violent destruction of an ancient oak grove that is federally protected. The Crestview Estate Homeowner Association is issuing a baseline fine of $250,000 payable within 14 days. That does not include the compounding daily penalties for operating heavy machinery without a permit or the mandatory restorative landscaping costs, which will likely exceed $500,000. Furthermore, because you violated the foundational covenants of your purchase agreement and committed fraud to obtain the deed. The Crestview estate has the absolute legal right to repossess the property. The formal notice of foreclosure has already been filed. You do not own that house, Jamal. You never did. You simply rented the backdrop for your own financial execution. Jamal stared at the drone photographs of the muddy crater, his chest heaving with panicked, ragged breaths. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire existence evaporate into thin air. The massive $250,000 fine, the federal wire fraud charges, the document forgery, the complete destruction of his corporate finance career. The weight of his own arrogance had finally crushed him completely. I sat at the head of the mahogany table watching the golden couple and my toxic parents drown in the consequences of their own horrific choices. The intense satisfaction of the moment was absolute. I leaned forward, resting my chin on my folded hands, and locked my eyes directly onto Jamal. I let the heavy silence stretch out, ensuring he felt the full devastating impact of his ruin. "I really have to ask Jamal," I said, my voice dropping to a smooth, icy whisper that carried effortlessly across the room. "Did your finance degree not teach you not to commit federal felonies to build a swimming pool?" Jamal went completely pale. His arrogant posture vaporized instantly. The loud, aggressive corporate bully who had insulted my car, mocked my career, and stolen my grandmother's trust fund was entirely gone. He collapsed into the leather chair beside Brittany, his head dropping into his hands as the inescapable reality of his absolute destruction finally consumed him. Brittany stared at her husband as he wept into his hands. The polished, confident man she had married was reduced to a trembling shell. She turned her wild, frantic eyes back to me, finally grasping the immediate physical consequence of the legal document sitting on the table. She was not just losing her social status. She was losing her actual residence. "But where are we supposed to go?" Brittany demanded, her voice cracking into a high-pitched whine. "You cannot just kick a pregnant woman out onto the street, Clara. We have custom furniture being delivered tomorrow. We already sent out change of address cards to all of Jamal's corporate partners. You have to give us at least a few months to find a comparable luxury rental." David did not even look up from his legal pad as he answered her. "You do not seem to understand the severity of a title forfeiture, Mrs. Davis. When you obtain a property deed through active financial fraud, the contract is entirely voided from inception. The Crestview estate is not an ordinary neighborhood, and we are not your standard landlord. Under the foundational covenants of this community, any resident who commits felony fraud to bypass our security vetting surrenders all property rights instantly." David pulled a crisp white document from his binder and slid it toward her. "This is a formal notice of repossession. The property belongs to Crestview Developments. The locks will be changed by our private security team in exactly 48 hours. If you leave any of your custom furniture behind, it will be considered abandoned property and incinerated. You are being evicted immediately." Brittany let out a choked gasp, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. She turned to our father. "Dad, do something. Tell her she cannot do this. You have to buy us a new house. You have to fix this." Richard stepped forward, but the usual aggressive authority he used to shield his golden child was completely absent. His face was a ghastly shade of gray. He looked like a man standing on the gallows, suddenly realizing the floorboards were about to drop. He looked at David, his hands visibly shaking. "Listen, we can handle the fines." Richard pleaded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Patricia and I can cover the $250,000 environmental penalty. We will set up a payment plan. Just leave the federal authorities out of this and let Brittany keep the house. I will just pay back the second mortgage we took out on our own home over time. I still have a good credit score." I leaned back in my executive chair, observing the sheer magnitude of my father's financial ignorance. He genuinely thought he could just write another check to sweep a federal crime under the rug. I signaled to David to break down the catastrophic math for him. "You do not have a good credit score anymore, Richard. David stated flatly, delivering the final fatal blow to my parents' financial security. Let us review the exact timeline of your catastrophic mistakes. You and Patricia took out a massive second mortgage on your primary Connecticut residence. You leveraged the equity you built over 30 years. You wired that cash to Jamal. Jamal then handed that physical, untraceable cash to a crew of black market contractors. David paused, letting the reality sink into the quiet boardroom. That money is gone, Richard. It does not exist anymore. You handed it to shadow laborers who drove away the second the municipal inspectors arrived. You still owe your bank for that second mortgage. But now you are also legally liable for the $250,000 environmental fine because you explicitly funded the illegal excavation. My mother, Patricia, gripped the edge of the mahogany table, her knuckles turning stark white. What are you saying? We have lived in our house for 3 decades. We hosted society dinners there. We cannot just lose our home. You already lost it, Patricia? I said, my voice slicing through her pathetic denial. You just have not realized it yet. You owe the bank a massive monthly payment for a second mortgage that funded a hole in the dirt. You owe the Environmental Protection Agency hundreds of thousands of dollars in restorative landscaping fees. The bank is going to see the federal liens attached to your names as financial accessories to Jamal's wire fraud. I watched my mother's eyes widen in absolute terror as I laid out her inescapable future. The bank is going to call in your loans immediately. I continued, keeping my tone completely detached. And when you cannot pay them because you gave all your liquid assets to Jamal, the bank will initiate a swift, aggressive foreclosure on your Connecticut home. You sacrificed the roof over your own head, your entire life savings, and your untarnished social reputation just to buy Brittany an illusion. And now you are completely bankrupt. Patricia let out a guttural, devastating wail. She collapsed into the chair beside my father, burying her face in her hands. The wealthy, arrogant socialite who had laughed at my modest car, who had mocked my career, who had proudly stolen my grandmother's trust fund, was entirely destroyed. She was going to lose her country club membership. She was going to lose her society friends. She was going to be thrown out onto the street by the very bank she had trusted for 30 years. The beautiful, flawless facade of the Golden family was actively burning to the ground inside my glass-walled boardroom. The toxic loyalty they had always weaponized against me was the exact thing that had sealed their total ruin. Brittany, realizing that her parents were completely bankrupt and could no longer rescue her, turned her vicious entitlement onto her husband. She slapped Jamal hard on the arm, her voice filled with pure venom. You told me you had this handled. You told me you were a financial genius. You promised me a luxury estate and a swimming pool, and instead you made us homeless criminals. Jamal did not even look at her. He just stared blankly at the polished mahogany table, paralyzed by the knowledge that his corporate career was dead. The federal authorities were already building a case against him. His firm would fire him by the end of the day. The fancy leased Porsche parked in my driveway would be repossessed by the dealership before the week was over. He had absolutely nothing left but a mountain of debt and impending prison time. I sat in silence, watching the ultimate devastating karma unfold. They had treated me like garbage for 34 years. They had demanded I work for free, insulted my intelligence, and actively tried to tear down everything I had built. They did it all because they believed they were untouchable. They believed their status and their stolen money made them gods. But in the ruthless world of high-end real estate and federal law, arrogance is the most expensive liability a person can possess. They had bet their entire existence against my boundaries, and they had lost every single thing they owned. The deafening silence in the boardroom finally shattered. It did not break with another aggressive outburst or a loud, authoritative demand. Instead, it crumbled into a pathetic whimpering sound that echoed off the cold glass walls. The sudden shift in the room's energy was jarring. The fierce entitlement that had fueled my family for my entire life evaporated, leaving behind nothing but raw, desperate cowardice. My mother, Patricia, was the first to completely break. The woman who had spent decades meticulously cultivating an image of flawless upper-class superiority physically collapsed. Her knees hit the imported marble floor with a dull, heavy thud. She crawled forward, dragging her expensive designer dress across the stone, grabbing the edge of the mahogany table. Her carefully styled hair fell wildly around her tear-stained face, her perfect makeup running in dark streaks down her cheeks. "Clara, please!" Patricia sobbed, her voice cracking into a high-pitched wail. "You cannot do this. You cannot let them take our home. We are your family. Blood is thicker than water, Clara. You cannot just stand by and watch your own parents lose everything." I stared down at her, watching the desperation warp her features. For 34 years, she had treated me like an unwanted burden. She had laughed at my modest car, mocked my profession, and publicly humiliated me to elevate Brittany. Now she was literally on her knees begging for salvation from the very daughter she had discarded. She reached out, attempting to grab the fabric of my tailored suit pants, but I took a deliberate step back, moving completely out of her reach. "Brittany is pregnant!" Patricia cried out, playing her ultimate trump card, her voice echoing with sheer panic. "She is your little sister and she is going to have a baby. You cannot put a pregnant woman and your unborn niece or nephew out on the street. You have a massive estate, Clara. You have millions of dollars. You can fix this with a single phone call. Show some mercy. We are blood." I did not move. I did not offer my hand to help her up. I simply looked at the woman who had happily emptied my grandmother's trust fund without a single ounce of remorse. "You are only invoking the word family because you are out of options, Patricia," I said, my voice perfectly level. "Blood did not stop you from stealing my inheritance. Family did not stop you from calling me a bitter spinster at a housewarming party funded by my stolen money. You do not care about blood. You only care about avoiding the consequences of your own greed." My father. Richard practically shoved himself out of his chair, stepping toward me with his hands raised in a pleading gesture. "Clara, listen to reason," he begged, his voice trembling with unchecked panic. "We raised you. We put a roof over your head. We provided for you when you were a child. You owe us at least the basic respect of helping us when we are drowning. We made a mistake, but we are still your parents. You cannot let us go bankrupt and face a criminal investigation at our age." I turned my cold gaze to Richard, the man who had proudly stood by while Jamal insulted me, the man who had mortgaged his own future to buy favor with a fraudulent son-in-law. "You provided the bare minimum required by law when I was a child," I corrected him sharply. "And the moment I became an adult, you made it abundantly clear that my only purpose in this family was to serve as a stepping stone for Brittany." "You did not make a mistake, Richard. A mistake is forgetting to pay a utility bill. Willfully wiring hundreds of thousands of dollars to shadow contractors to bypass environmental laws is a calculated criminal choice. You chose Brittany's vanity over your own financial security. You do not get to cash in a parental debt that you never actually earned." The rejection hit him like a physical blow. Richard staggered back, sinking into his leather chair and burying his face in his trembling hands. The invincible patriarch was entirely broken. But the most pathetic display came from Jamal. The arrogant finance director who had strutted into my boardroom demanding obedience was entirely gone. His custom silk shirt was wrinkled and stained with nervous sweat. He slowly pushed himself up from his chair, his eyes wide with pure, unfiltered terror. He looked at David, my lead attorney, and then turned his desperate gaze back to me. "Clara, please." Jamal stammered, his voice stripped of every single ounce of corporate bravado. "I am begging you on my hands and knees. You can take the house. You can take the entire property. I will sign the eviction papers right now. Just please tell your legal team to drop the wire fraud charges. Tell the municipal inspectors it was a terrible misunderstanding. Do not involve the federal authorities in this mess." He stepped closer, clutching his leather briefcase against his chest like a protective shield. "If the federal authorities investigate those shell companies, I am finished. The regulatory board will permanently revoke my finance license. I will face actual federal prison time, Clara. I will lose my entire career and my freedom. You are a highly successful business owner. You understand the intense pressure of the corporate hustle. I just wanted to provide a luxury lifestyle for my wife. I just got a little desperate to impress the right people. Please do not send me to prison. I will do anything you want. I will work multiple jobs to pay you back every single cent." Just give me some time to fix this. I looked at the man who had confidently stated that rules were only suggestions for people who did not have enough money. The man who had ruthlessly mocked my landscaping business and laughed at my modest lifestyle in front of a crowded restaurant. You do not have any money to pay me back, Jamal? I stated coldly, my words slicing through his pathetic excuses. You are completely bankrupt, and your credit is utterly destroyed. You built your entire identity on the illusion of elite wealth, but you are nothing but a common fraudster who thought he could outsmart a binding legal contract. You destroyed protected environmental land because your fragile ego could not handle being told no. Your prestigious finance degree should have taught you the basic principles of risk management. You gambled with federal laws to build a swimming pool and you lost absolutely everything. Please. Jamal sobbed, actual tears spilling down his face, completely shattering his masculine facade. I am a professional. I cannot go to a federal penitentiary. I will lose my mind in a place like that. Brittany needs me. I need to be here for my family. Your family is not my responsibility, I replied, my tone completely detached. And your professional license is exactly what you used to forge the homeowner association applications. You weaponized your career to commit fraud on my property. Expecting me to shield you from the federal consequences of your own criminal arrogance is completely absurd. Brittany finally found her voice screaming from her chair, her face twisted in pure agony. You are a monster, Clara. You are a cold, heartless monster. No, Brittany, I said, turning to face the golden child one last time. I am simply a mirror. I am reflecting your exact actions right back at you. You all walked into my home and demanded free labor. You stole my grandmother's trust fund. You destroyed my land. And now you are begging me to save you from the fires you intentionally set. The era of me absorbing your collateral damage is officially over. The pathetic sobbing filled the boardroom, a symphony of total absolute defeat. They had run out of threats, they had run out of stolen money, and they had finally run out of the one thing they thought would always be there to exploit my blind family loyalty. I stood up slowly from my leather executive chair. The simple movement commanded absolute silence in the boardroom. Even my mother stopped her pathetic whimpering, watching me with wide, terrified eyes. I walked around the massive mahogany table, my heels clicking sharply against the imported marble floor, until I stood directly in front of her. She was still kneeling, clutching her designer dress, looking up at me like a cornered animal. I looked down at her, feeling a profound sense of closure wash over my entire body. You sat in your pristine kitchen just 1 month ago. I began, my voice ringing with crystal clear authority. You laughed in my face while you stole my grandmother money. You looked me dead in the eyes and told me I would never have a house like my sister. You told me I was just a landscaper playing in the dirt. I paused, letting the memory of her arrogance hang in the cold air. You were right, Patricia. I will never have a house like my sister. I have an estate. I own the land she built her fake life on. I own the roads she drove to get here. I own the very ground beneath your feet. And you also told me I did not need that trust fund money because I lived such a modest, pathetic life. You were right about that too. I did not need that $300,000 to survive. But you certainly needed it. And instead of saving it, you threw it into a muddy crater to buy approval from a fraudster. You burned your own sanctuary to the ground just to keep me in my place. My father tried to reach for my hand, his face an absolute portrait of shattered pride. Clara, please, he begged, his voice cracking. We can sell our cars. We can liquidate our retirement accounts. We will pay back the homeowner association fine. Just give us time. Do not report Jamal to the federal authorities. Do not make us homeless. I stepped back, completely disgusted by his lack of basic moral integrity. You still do not understand, Richard. This is not a negotiation. This is not a family argument where you can just yell at me until I submit. This is the real world where federal laws and binding contracts govern behavior. I am not dropping the foreclosure. I am not hiding the wire fraud. I am not protecting any of you from the legal consequences of your own deliberate criminal actions. The eviction stands exactly as written. You and Jamal have exactly 48 hours to pack whatever personal belongings you can fit into your vehicles and vacate Lot 42. If anyone remains on my property after that deadline, my private security team will physically remove you and hand you over to the local police for criminal trespassing. Furthermore, the environmental damage fines are non-negotiable. The corporate legal team will pursue full restitution through the courts. Your wages will be garnished, and your bank accounts will be seized. I will not stop until every single cent of the damage you caused to the protected watershed is entirely paid for. Jamal let out a guttural sound of pure despair, dropping his head onto the polished mahogany table. Brittany just stared blankly at the glass walls, completely catatonic, as her lavish future evaporated into thin air. I turned my back on them and nodded to David. My lead attorney immediately signaled the security detail waiting in the corridor. The heavy oak doors swung open, and 4 large men in dark tactical uniforms stepped into the boardroom. Escort these individuals off the premises, David instructed, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. Ensure they return directly to Lot 42 to pack their belongings. If they attempt to access any other part of the central manor, detain them immediately. The security guards moved forward, pulling my mother to her feet and gesturing for my father and Jamal to stand. The sheer humiliation of being physically escorted out of a room by armed guards finally broke whatever remaining pride my father possessed. He kept his eyes glued to the marble floor, unable to look at me or David, or the litigators who had systematically dismantled his life. Brittany stumbled as she walked, leaning heavily against Jamal, who looked like a dead man walking. They shuffled toward the double oak doors, a pathetic broken procession of arrogant people who had finally met their match. I remained in the boardroom, standing near the floor-to-ceiling glass walls, looking out over the expansive valley. David came to stand beside me, silently holding his legal binder. We watched as the security detail marched my family out of the grand entrance and down the sprawling granite steps. They piled into their leased Porsche and my parents' luxury sport utility vehicle. The engines started up, and the cars began their slow, humiliating descent down the winding mountain road. They had to pass back through all 3 heavily fortified checkpoints, knowing they would never be allowed to drive up this hill again. But the ultimate consequence was waiting for them at the very bottom. As their vehicles approached the final security gate near the main entrance of the Crestview estate, I noticed a sudden flurry of movement on the monitors. A convoy of dark sedans and heavily marked law enforcement vehicles aggressively pulled up to the perimeter. Bright red and blue police lights began flashing violently, cutting through the morning shadows of the valley. The federal authorities had arrived. David checked his phone and smiled a sharp, predatory grin. The compliance department at Jamal corporate finance firm did not waste any time, David noted smoothly. They alerted the authorities the second they verified the forged income statements and the shell company wire transfers. Those flashing lights belonged to the Federal Fraud Division. I watched the tiny vehicles on the road below. The security gates remained firmly locked, trapping Jamal leased Porsche right between my armed guards and the incoming federal agents. There was absolutely nowhere left for him to run. The golden couple and my toxic parents were completely surrounded. The iron boundaries I had established were now officially enforced by the federal government. I watched the red and blue lights illuminate the valley, feeling a profound sense of vindication. The toxic cycle was permanently broken. I stepped out onto the expansive glass balcony of the central manor. The morning air was sharp and cool, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth from the surrounding forest. I held a steaming porcelain cup of Earl Grey tea, letting the soothing warmth seep deep into my palms as I looked down at the sprawling valley below. The flashing red and blue lights of the federal vehicles had already begun to fade, winding their way back toward the main highway and out of my gates. They were taking Jamal into federal custody, while my parents and Brittany followed closely behind in a state of absolute humiliating disgrace. They were no longer my problem to solve or my burden to carry. They were simply a cautionary tale about the devastating cost of unchecked arrogance and blind entitlement. Watching their cars disappear from my territory forever brought a wave of highly complex emotions. Society conditions us to believe that biological family is an unbreakable sacred bond. We are taught from a very young age to forgive countless transgressions, to turn the other cheek, and to sacrifice our own mental health on the altar of blood loyalty. For 34 years, I had suffocated under that exact expectation. I had absorbed every insult, every calculated microaggression, and every blatant financial theft because I desperately wanted to earn a place at a table that was specifically designed to exclude me. Cutting off your toxic family is never an easy, straightforward decision. It is an agonizing, deeply painful process. It is not just about walking away from the people who intentionally hurt you. It is about actively mourning the parents and the sister you deserved, but never actually had. I grieved for the mother who should have been fiercely proud of my career. I grieved for the father who should have protected my grandmother's trust fund instead of helping to steal it. I grieved for the sister who should have been my closest lifelong ally instead of my cruelest competitor. But allowing that perfectly valid grief to exist did not mean I had to allow them to destroy my life. Protecting your peace and defending your hard-earned empire is absolutely paramount. I had spent over a decade building Crestview developments from absolutely nothing. I had worked grueling 80-hour weeks navigating complex urban planning boards and fighting for every single acre of pristine conservation land. I built a sustainable ecosystem where nature and modern architecture existed in perfect, flawless harmony. I was not going to let a fragile corporate ego and a bitter, twisted family dynamic tear down my life's work just to build an illegal swimming pool. I had drawn an iron boundary, and I had enforced it with the full, crushing weight of the law. The silence that settled over the mountain peak was profound and beautifully absolute. I took another slow sip of my tea, feeling a profound sense of physical and emotional liberation. My chest no longer held the heavy, anxious knot that used to form whenever my phone rang with my mother's caller ID. I no longer had to brace myself for the inevitable condescending comparisons to the golden child. The toxic background noise of my entire life had finally been muted permanently. Moving forward, my life became a testament to the undeniable power of genuine independence. The $250,000 environmental fine that Jamal and my parents were legally forced to pay did not just disappear into a corporate slush fund. I directed every single cent of that penalty straight into a dedicated conservation trust. I hired top-tier ecological restoration experts to carefully repair the jagged, muddy crater they had recklessly dug into the southern ridge. We replanted mature native oak trees, stabilizing the vital watershed and ensuring the ancient grove would continue to thrive for generations to come. The earth slowly healed, and so did my spirit. I surrounded myself entirely with people who actually respected and valued my presence. My chosen family consisted of brilliant, driven professionals like David and his dedicated legal team, who fought relentlessly to protect our shared corporate vision. My dinner table was no longer a toxic battleground of passive-aggressive insults and constant belittlement. Instead, it was filled with genuine friends, colleagues, and urban planning partners who valued my intelligence and celebrated my successes without a single ounce of petty jealousy. We shared joyful laughter, shared innovative ideas, and built real, equitable partnerships based on mutual respect. As for my biological family, I never spoke to them again. The legal eviction was executed flawlessly and without mercy. Jamal faced a brutal federal trial that completely dismantled his highly praised financial career, resulting in severe prison time and the permanent revocation of his professional licenses. Brittany was forced to abandon her fake luxury aesthetic, moving into a cramped apartment while she navigated her husband's criminal fallout as a single mother. My parents lost their sprawling Connecticut home to bank foreclosure, moving into a tiny rental unit and living out their retirement years in the exact modest lifestyle they had once mocked me for. They had gambled their entire existence to maintain a pathetic illusion, and the house always wins. I remained on my glass balcony watching the bright morning sun fully illuminate the sweeping green canopy of the Crestview estate. The golden light caught the sharp modern edges of the architecture, highlighting the strength and absolute stability of the empire I had built with my own two hands. I was 34 years old. I was the sole owner of a multi-million-dollar real estate development firm. I was a highly respected urban planner. But most importantly, I was a woman who knew her absolute worth and completely refused to let anyone discount it. True wealth is not defined by the car you drive or the designer clothes you wear to a housewarming party. True wealth is the ability to stand entirely on your own, unbothered, untouchable, and completely free. Have you ever had to draw a hard legal line to protect yourself from your own flesh and blood? Let me know your story in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of surviving toxic families. Society heavily romanticizes the concept of unconditional familial loyalty, insisting that blood ties demand endless sacrifice and forgiveness. However, this journey shatters that dangerous myth, revealing a profound truth: sharing DNA does not obligate you to absorb someone else's abuse, nor does it require you to fund their delusions. True family is not built on exploitation or the relentless demand to shrink yourself so others can feel large. The most powerful lesson echoing through the silent glass-walled boardroom is that authentic success thrives in the quiet dedication to one's craft, not in the loud, desperate clamor for external validation. While arrogance builds fragile houses of cards out of forged documents, stolen funds, and hollow status symbols, genuine self-worth constructs unshakable empires. True power is cultivated when you stop seeking approval from people who are fiercely committed to misunderstanding you. Clara did not need to scream, retaliate emotionally, or beg for her family's respect. She simply stepped aside and allowed the natural, devastating consequences of their own hubris to unfold perfectly. Establishing iron boundaries is rarely an act of cruelty. Rather, it is the ultimate act of self-preservation. Walking away from toxic relatives requires an agonizing mourning process, grieving the supportive family you deserved, but never actually received. Yet on the other side of that profound grief lies absolute, untouchable freedom. Protecting your peace, your mental health, and your hard-earned reality must always remain your highest priority. You are completely allowed to close the door on those who bring nothing but chaos and destruction to your doorstep. Take a moment today to evaluate the relationships draining your energy and dare to draw the firm boundaries necessary to protect your own peace.